Morning, everybody. It's 7 o'clock. Coming up on today's programme, how a cyber attack has left the NHS in urgent need of blood donations.
It's another big week in the election campaign. The first of the manifesto launches is this morning.
And concern for one of the legends of the game, former Liverpool captain Alan Hansen, remains seriously ill in hospital.
It's Monday, the 10th of June. The NHS urgently appeals for type O blood donors after a cyber attack on London hospitals. President Macron is accused of gambling with French democracy by calling a snap election after his party is obliterated by the far right in European polls. The wife of Dr. Michael Mosley pays tribute to her brilliant husband. As it emerged, he fell just yards from safety. Shooting ahead, the Lib Dems will be the first party to launch their manifesto later this morning.
The realm's only hope is in a leader strong enough to unite it.
And are you ready for Dragons? The new series of the Game of Thrones spin-off premieres this very evening. Morning, everybody. The NHS is urgently appealing for type O blood donors after a cyber attack on hospitals in London. The Blood and Transplant Service specifically needs donors who are O positive or O negative because these blood types can be given to all patients. The cyber attack has meant that hospitals are having to make manual checks, which take longer.
The London hospitals affected by the cyber incident have been ordering extra O positive and O negative blood. Now, the challenges of not having a pathology system means that they are manually having to check what blood type an individual has, and this takes time. Now, in emergencies, they have the option of giving O positive and O negative. Therefore, it's prudent that they have a higher quantity of that in the hospitals.
Tom's here. Tell me more, Tom.
Well, they always keep surplus of the most useful blood types, which are O, because anyone, whether you're A, B, or AB, you can receive type O blood. So it's the most useful reserve to have for donations. But in a time of emergency, when you might have a delay, for example, an operation or an emergency case that comes in, you don't have time to run the patient's blood sample, get it checked by pathology and bring the result back. You know you can safely give them O negative or O positive, whichever matches their rhesus blood type. So it's an emergency response to the fact that they have got this massive delay in these London hospitals with pathology services due to this cyber attack. The pathology service that worked for Guy's, King St Thomas's hospitals went down over last week. Actually, in fact, a week today went down.
That was the cyber attack, wasn't it?
Ransomware attack on their servers. So their data, we don't quite know what's been locked up or beyond their access, but for some reason they are having problems getting their operation back up and running. And until they do, we haven't got a detailed update on exactly what's going on in the hospital, but we know that they've had to draft in medical students to literally walk the floor with pathology samples, to take them to the pathology lab, get results the old way, bring back, pen and paper stuff, ferrying results to and from, because the digital service that runs the pathology there is currently down. They say it might be a couple of weeks before they can get it back up. And the thing that's been most affected is the blood results getting to and from. So there's now this appeal, more type O blood. Just in case we have emergencies, we need extra reserves of that blood while this crisis continues.
OK. And that is regular operations, women giving birth, emergencies.
Exactly. I think a lot of elective stuff has been cancelled, moved to other hospitals. But certainly for, yes, emergency during, childbirth is an excellent example. You don't know whether you're going to have a bleed after childbirth, and often there isn't very much. And obviously the mother's blood type would be established before they go in, so they'd already know that information. But quickly matching blood to you might take a delay. So you need that. If you're O positive, they need some O positive blood on the shelf. O negative, which anyone can receive, they need that on the shelf too. I think only about 3% of the UK has O negative blood. So, they really want donors to come forward for that. O positive, that's the most common blood type. That's me as well. 33% of the country, so they need them to come forward. So it's just this drive. Come in, give blood if you can.
And I'm A positive, but I can still donate blood? And how do I do that?
They'd be delighted to have your blood because you have a rarer blood types that could be useful for someone. It's less useful in an emergency like this, but it's still valuable recipient. you need to contact NHS Blood and Transplant. Their website is fully available. They have donor centres in pretty much every town and city up and down the UK. It happens to be National Blood Week this week, so they are more than willing to get people to come forward. I unfortunately can't donate this week because I donated only a few weeks ago. Oh. So you have to take a 3-month break every time you've donated. So I've got a little bit of a pause.
Half an arm.
Exactly. But they're asking people to come forward and donate their blood.
OK. I go onto the website and you can find more information there. For now, thanks very much. Now, France's President Emmanuel Macron has dissolved the French Parliament and announced a snap poll after his party suffered a crushing loss to the French far right in the European Parliament election. Our Europe correspondent Adam Parsons reports.
In France, a seismic moment. The far-right Rassemblement National party on its way to a crushing victory in the country's European election. They pushed President Macron's Renaissance party into a distant second place, winning more than twice as many votes. Macron's response? Dissolving Parliament and calling fresh elections.
La montée des nationalistes, des démagogues, est un danger pour notre nation.
The rise in nationalists poses a danger to the nation.
For so many years, Marine Le Pen has been the mainstay of the French far right, but never has she seen a victory as remarkable as this. 94% of constituencies voted for her party.
Je ne peux que saluer cette décision qui s'inscrit dans la logique.
I can only welcome this decision, which is in line with the logic of the institutions of the Fifth Republic. We're ready for it. After the legislative elections of 2022, which designated the National Rally Party as the main parliamentary opponent, these European elections confirm our movement as the major force for change in France.
She and party president Jordan Bardella have smoothed the edge of their politics. Now the far right is on top. The catalyst for President Macron's decision were the elections for this place, the European Parliament. And we have seen a surge in support for nationalist and far-right parties. But in France, that surge has turned into a shockwave. In Brussels, an election party for young liberals and a sense of shock at Macron's move.
I think he's really cynical and he's playing a dangerous game because I think he's risking to play out the security and the stability of French democracy.
On a night of turbulence, the Belgian Prime Minister also announced that he would be resigning following bad results. And in Paris, protests. The Rassemblement National may spark anger, but the fact is they won this election by a mile. Across France, there's a desire for change. This nation may just have fallen out of love with its president. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Brussels.
Terrible news over the weekend about Michael Mosley. Everybody hoping against hope that he would be found alive. The wife of Dr. Mosley paying tribute to her brilliant husband, the TV doctor, on holiday in Greece when he went missing after going for a walk. It's emerged that he fell literally yards from safety. Sadia standing by for us on the Isle of Simi this morning. When I saw the pictures in the paper this morning, I couldn't believe how close he was to safety. Sadia, good morning.
Yeah, good morning. And that was what Dr. Mosley's wife wrote in her statement, didn't she? She talked about how she gets comfort from the fact that he was so close to where he was going. But look, lots of questions still remain, and we're waiting for the coroner to come back with her report, and we expect that to be in the next few days. I suppose a sense of closure for the family that he's been found, because there have been reports of other people that have gone missing, and some people have never been found, and it's something that she herself, Dr. Mosley's wife, described as anguishing. And we know that from speaking to people who have spoken to her that she has had a lot of anxiety over the last few days. And of course, part of that coroner's process will be for the body to be formally identified by the family. But this is something that has really taken over this island as well. Many of the ground rescue team that we met and encountered have other jobs on this island, like pizza. They work in pizza restaurants or are coach drivers for local tours. And so it's something that everyone has really been speaking about. And as I say, lots of questions now remain over what Dr. Mosley where he was attempting to go, and we expect that in the next few days.
OK, for now, thank you. Dogs barking in the background there.
They certainly were in good form this morning, weren't they?
Yeah.
But like you said, those images, when you saw just how close, as one paper said, 60 seconds could have made all the difference. Thoughts very much with his entire family and his children as well. I've not.
Yeah, it's actually, I'll send it to you. It's really, really good. He's, when I say to you, stand on one leg when you're brushing your teeth.
Yes, which you do every morning.
That's him.
Oh, OK.
Yeah, lots of little tips like that were planned to extend his life. His father died when he was in his 70s. He felt that was very young, and he wanted to be able to live much longer than his dad. Absolute tragedy. Tragedy. Thoughts with the family.
Very much so. Let's bring some of the day's other stories now. Let's move on to Israel, because the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, looking more isolated this morning after the resignation of Benny Gantz from his war cabinet. Alistair Bunkle's standing by for us, joining us from Jerusalem. Alistair, what does this mean now for both the government, but also for the conflict and for the hostages who still awaiting rescue?
Firstly, I think it was inevitable that Gantz was going to go. He had delivered an ultimatum to Benjamin Netanyahu. He had demanded that progress be made on a number of issues surrounding the war in Gaza. One was progress on the release of hostages. Another was to try and resolve what is going on the northern border between Hezbollah and Israel. But ultimately, Netanyahu had made very little progress on any of those demands. And so Gantz was always going to then withdraw himself and his party from the government of national unity that was set up after October the 7th. He was supposed to do it on Saturday when the deadline expired, but he postponed it by 24 hours because of that successful hostage raid in Gaza that brought 4 of the hostages out alive. So what does it mean now? Well, Gantz, freed from any restrictions that he might have felt while serving in the wartime government, will presumably become far more critical of Netanyahu, and he will have inside knowledge about how the war has been fought and directed, and he, we expect, will use that against Netanyahu. He will call, as he did last night, for fresh elections. I think Netanyahu will continue to resist that. Netanyahu himself, we assume, will become more beholden now to the far-right voices in his government, the likes of Itamar Ben-Gvir, the nationalist security minister, who has already demanded a seat in the war cabinet. He wants the fight to be harder in Gaza, to be longer, and for parts of Gaza to be reoccupied. So Netanyahu will have those voices more loudly in his ear. But he will also have pressure from the likes of the Americans, who saw Gantz as being a moderate, calm head in the room. Gantz is no longer there, and so it puts a very different dynamic on the way that this war will be directed and what the progress of this war might be in the coming weeks.
We'll keep a close eye on the developments. For the moment, Alistair, thank you so much. The inquest into the death of the teenage motorcyclist Harry Dunn begins later this morning. Harry died just hours after he was knocked off his bike near RAF Croughton in 2019. Former US spy Anne Secoulis admitted driving on the wrong side of the road and was handed an 8-month suspended sentence. The inquest is expected to address road safety issues outside US military bases in the UK. Cat owners in England could face a fine of up to £500 if they fail to microchip their pet. It's now a legal requirement for cats to be microchipped before they're 20 weeks old. Animal charities say it will be easier for lost, stray or stolen felines to be reunited with their owners.
Chris Philp with us, Minister of State for Crime, Policing and Fires. Good to see you as always. Thanks for taking the time. When was the last time you spoke to the Prime Minister?
The last time I spoke to the Prime Minister, probably when Parliament was still sitting. We had a text message exchange a few days ago, but I haven't spoken to him since Parliament broke up.
How bruised is he after his misstep in Normandy?
Well, look, I think he's acknowledged he made a mistake. He should have gone to that event hosted by President Macron, but he recognised that really quickly. The next morning, he apologised pretty fulsomely. Now, it's fairly rare, I think you'll agree as a journalist, to see a senior politician apologise so quickly. So I think it was really sort of sincerely sincerely felt, because he is someone who has really backed veterans. You know, he was meeting veterans not just on the Wednesday and Thursday of last week, but he's been as Chancellor and as Prime Minister has done all kinds of things to support veterans, strengthening the Armed Forces Covenant, putting Johnny Mercer as Veterans Minister in the Cabinet, increasing defence expenditure for our armed forces. We're going to get to 2.5% of GDP by 2030. That's a pledge Labour hasn't matched. So he's really, really committed to our armed services, and that's why when he recognised he had made a mistake, he apologised straight away.
I wonder how bruised he is, though, as I said, by this misstep, because we haven't really seen him talking to journalists or wanting to chat in any way to anybody other than the people that he's doing his photo opportunities with. He cancelled a journalist huddle, a media huddle, as we call it, on Saturday. And we haven't seen him really since.
Well, I think he's out, as I understand it, I think he's out on the campaign trail today, meeting people, no doubt, including journalists as well. And I don't think there's any... I'm sure he regrets deeply not having attended that event, which is why, obviously, he rightly apologised, because it was a mistake. But he's recognised that, he's apologised, and I think we'll see him bouncing around the campaign trail this week, and I'm sure he'll be talking to journalists whenever they want to ask him some questions.
Yeah, I did tweet, actually, last week saying that Cameron was a seasoned politician and he should have known. He should have guided him and said, mate, this is not a clever thing to do. The Sunday Times reporting yesterday that David Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, told the Prime Minister to stay at D-Day, and he personally decided not to.
Well, I don't know about the sort of inner workings of who recommended what and you know, what advisor said what.
It's the Foreign Secretary talking to the Prime Minister.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what conversation took place there, but obviously the Prime Minister has apologised. But he is rightly apologised. But he is a Prime Minister, as I said, who's really backed veterans and backed the armed services, and that funding pledge, 2.5% of GDP being spent on defence in excess of our NATO target, is a really important commitment to back our armed forces, a commitment that Labour has not matched.
What's your plan to boost local policing?
Well, we're going to be recruiting another 8,000 police officers over the next 3 or 4 years. That's on top of the record numbers of police officers we've already got. So last year we hit 149,566. That is, I'm counting every single one. That is over 3,000 more than we've ever had before. The previous peak was in about 2010. So on top of that record ever number of police, as I say, 8,000 more officers specifically dedicated to neighbourhoods. That means patrolling the area where you live, the area where I live, and the area where your viewers live, to make sure they're on hand to deal with any incidents, to investigate crime, to provide patrols, to reassure the public, to prevent crime as well. A really important commitment to help protect the public. Crime, by the way, according to the crime survey, is down by 50%, over 50%, on a like-for-like basis since 2010. So fraud and computer misuse came into the figures in 2016. In the last year, including cybercrime and fraud, overall crime went down by 6%. Homicides, the most obviously serious form of crime, they're down. There were 577 last year, 620 in the last year of the last Labour government. So crime is coming down on any measure, any crime survey measure. That's the ONS's sort of authorised, preferred method of measuring long-term crime trends. But we'd like to go further, and these 8,000 extra police officers on top of the record numbers we've got will do that.
Officers will be given new powers and tools to catch criminals. What will that look like?
Well, for example, when the police know where someone's mobile phone or iPad is, based on the kind of Find My iPhone app, other mobile phones are available, no doubt, then the public expect the police to immediately rightly expect the police to immediately go to the place where that stolen iPhone or iPad or other mobile phone is located and retrieve it. Now, at the moment, to enter private premises, like a house or a flat, to retrieve stolen property, you need a magistrate's warrant first. Now, that can take a bit of time to obtain. It could take a few days to obtain. So where the police know that there are stolen goods in in a property, based on the sort of Find My iPhone app, without needing a warrant, they can go in and retrieve those stolen goods immediately. That's one example. Another example is we're going to ban the signal jamming technology used to steal cars, often high-end cars, We're going to ban the possession of that technology unless, obviously, you're a legitimate garage or something. We're going to increase the penalties for selling knives to under 18s. A whole range of measures to combat knife crime as well. And we're going to be investing heavily in facial recognition technology. So we've been trialling this in Croydon, the borough that I represent in Parliament, and this technology can now identify wanted criminals who haven't previously been caught. It can identify them walking down the street, and police can then arrest them. In Croydon, in the last 3 or 4 months, 135 criminals have been caught using this technology in the last few months, including a man wanted for 2 rapes, one dating back to 2017. So investing in this facial recognition technology will also catch a lot more criminals.
Been in power for 14 years. These last 4 comments that you made, why have you not done that already?
Well, the facial recognition technology and the signal jamming, and the signal jamming technology and the Find My iPhone sort of technology, those are all quite recent technical innovations. So we're responding.
It's been around for years. Find My iPhone.
We're responding to those.
I've found a lost iPhones many occasions using that. Yeah.
Well, so certainly the signal jamming technology and the facial recognition is fairly new.
I can also check where my son is.
Ah, OK. Does he appreciate that?
No,
Probably not.
He doesn't let me.
So, but we're constantly looking for new ideas. And as I say, overall crime, according to the crime survey, down 55%, but we'd like to go further.
How are you going to pay for it?
So the cost of the 8,000 extra police officers is £818 million. The majority of that, about 600 million, will come from removing the student discount to the immigration health surcharge and also increasing visa fees by 25%. The remaining 200 or so million will come from the 6 billion we're raising by clamping down on tax evasion. We've so far only spent 5.3 billion of that.
That's a lot of numbers this morning, Minister.
Well, you asked me a question about spending, so I'm giving you the numbers.
I did.
So that's how it's being funded, anyway.
A small written test later on, I'm sure. The director of Institute for Fiscal Studies says politicians are tying themselves in knots, promising not to raise taxes, and neither of the main parties want to talk about the scale of the financial challenge ahead of the next government. Is that true?
I don't think it is true. I mean, we're very clear that we're being careful, the Conservatives are being careful about spending pledges. You asked me quite reasonably just then how we're funding the 8,000 police officers, and I gave you a very detailed answer. We produced a dossier a couple of weeks ago that was obviously a big feature of the debate between Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak, showing that Labour have made a total of 27 policy announcements, some costing money, some raising tax. And when you net all of that off and you cost them all individually, those 27 measures, you find it's going to cost £38 billion over the next Parliament, which is £2,000 of extra tax for each working household. So Labour will saddle the public with extra taxes because of all of those 27 pledges that I just mentioned.
Given that you're so far behind in the polls and given that the Prime Minister just doesn't seem to be able to catch a break at the moment, what's your motivation?
As a party or personally?
For you?
Well, look, I mean, I love representing my constituents in the constituency I've had the honour to represent for the last 9 years. I'd like to keep doing that, working hard to deliver things. I won't list all the things I've done locally, but personally, I find continuing to do that work locally extremely motivating. And on a national level, you know, we live in a very dangerous and uncertain world. We have huge challenges. You know, we've seen the challenges of COVID, global high inflation, the rise of China, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And I think it's just really important to, as a matter of public service, just try and do everything like I can as an individual, but the party more widely, to try and help our country navigate through these really difficult waters. And I think it's important to step up and to do that. It's very easy just to, look, some of my colleagues have gone back into private life and gone back to business or whatever. But I think particularly at times like these, it's important to be willing to serve.
When you saw what the Prime Minister did last week, leaving D-Day veterans literally on the beaches so he could come back and record a TV interview, did you have your head in your hands? I couldn't believe it. When I heard, I literally couldn't believe that that's what he'd done. I couldn't get it. Why?
Well, I mean, obviously it was a mistake. I mean, to be fair...
What was your reaction?
Well, to be fair to the Prime Minister, he did obviously attend all the events in the UK and met veterans, and he attended the British-hosted events in Normandy and met British veterans there.
President Biden, President Macron,
yeah, but he should have gone to. He should have gone to the final one. That's right, and he's apologised.
Yeah, but I'm asking you how you felt, or what was your reaction when you heard the news?
Well, I was surprised and disappointed, but he apologised, and I think if you look at his track record looking after veterans and funding the armed services, he's got a good track record, a track record that he can be proud of, a track record the party can be proud of, and a track record the country can be proud of.
OK. Good to see you, as always. Thank you very much indeed, Minister. Thank you. Let's return to one of the stories about one of the legends of the game now. That's the former Liverpool captain and TV pundit, Alan Hansen, remaining seriously ill in hospital this morning. He is, without question, one of the most decorated players in the club's history, winning 8 league championships and 3 European Cups. He's absolute legend, isn't he? Emma's here. Tell us more.
Actually, in the statement from Liverpool Football Club, they've described him beautifully, saying a defender of the utmost elegance. So joined Liverpool from Partick Thistle in 1977. This real golden era you were just naming there, the 8 league titles, the 3 European Cups, the 2 FA Cups. He had 26 appearances for Scotland as well, and then retired in 1991. And actually, you didn't need to be a big football fan to recognise Alan Hansen and his unique voice, Scottish accent. And he didn't hold back in his TV punditry. Yeah, if the play was poor, he'd let you know about it, calling it diabolical or shocking. So the news came yesterday afternoon from Liverpool Football Club. They released a statement. This is what they said. Jockey, as he was known by teammates, is in the top 10 for all-time appearances for the club, having played 620 matches. And the Scottish centre-back also served as Liverpool skipper for 4 seasons. The club is currently in contact with Alan's family to provide our support at this difficult time. And our thoughts, wishes and hopes are with Alan and all of the Hansen family. And there have been, as you would expect, messages of support from across football and beyond. We've heard from Gary Lineker, who described it as horrendous news. And on Match of the Day's X account, they've said their thoughts and prayers with Alan and his family. And any updates will be coming through the club.
Of course. I met him a little bit. I didn't know him well, but I knew him a little bit, and he was absolutely charm personified. We wish him well, and the family as well, of course. Yeah. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News. The Lib Dems launched their manifesto today. We'll find out what's in it with the Deputy Leader, Daisy Cooper. Labour says there'll be no tax increases for working people, but can they foot the bill? We'll hear from the Shadow Education Secretary, Bridget Phillipson. And a little later, we'll be talking about election anxiety and how to tell if you've got it with a psychologist here in the studio.
Westminster may seem far from Grimsby and Cleethorpes, but not for long. With a general election around the corner, we're bringing you Sunak versus Starmer, live from Grimsby. Putting their cases forward and facing questions from a live audience. Who will convince you to give them the keys to this place? The battle for number 10. Get the full story first on Sky News.
The Paddington Bear experience is a sensory immersive experience that's based heavily on the Studio Canal films, where audiences can go into the world of Paddington and explore all the different sights and sounds and iconic locations on an adventure where audiences are there to help celebrate the Marmalade Day Festival, which in our experience happens every day. It's built over about 26,000 square foot at County Hall, which is obviously a very prominent building opposite Big Ben, and gives audiences and family groups a chance to go in and complete lots of challenges and games and help Paddington make sure that Marmalade Day goes off without a hitch. Well, I think that Paddington is, obviously stands for such, good values. And I think, for a bear that stands for kindness and for being polite and for, the empathy that he shows is something I think we all look to and inspire to. But aside from that, I think that it's continued to be so relevant to so many different generations. Obviously, the new movies have been so successful, bringing Paddington to new audiences. But, it's a 65-year-old brand and is known, for the books and the TV series, and has been so well looked after. And obviously, there was that iconic moment with the Queen before she passed away, which I think think it brought the nation's heart and how much we love that bear. We are opposite, Big Ben, and we're right in the heart of London, very accessible for groups all over the city. But, the experience allows audiences to go into all the different sights and sounds through the Browns house. They even get to travel over to Peru, which is very relevant with the new film coming out this November called Paddington in Peru. So it's a really fun sensory experience for all the family.
And disappointed by the Prime Minister, says one of his senior ministers.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting how far he went on that with UK. And the fact that he's saying, I was surprised, is indicative, it's a bit of a hint, isn't it, that, his instinct was, why would you do something like that? I think that's...
Yeah, you're a bit of a donkey. Absolutely, that's what he was saying. Let's see what we see from the Prime Minister. We'll have to see him today, won't we?
He's doing a pool clip later today on behalf of all broadcasts, and then he's recording a panorama interview for, I think, this evening as well.
OK, good. Rest of the news?
Yes, remind you of our top stories this morning. As we've been saying over the course of the morning, the NHS launching a major appeal for type O blood donors after a cyber attack that affected some of the largest hospitals in London. The ransomware attack means affected hospitals can't match blood from donors as quickly and needs O blood to replenish dwindling stocks. France's President Emmanuel Macron has announced a shock-snap election after his party suffered a huge loss to the far right in elections to the European Parliament. Mr Macron called on the rise of nationalists a danger to both France and Europe, but said he couldn't pretend nothing had happened. The Liberal Democrats will become the first major party to launch their manifesto later this morning. The Conservatives and Labour expected to release theirs later this week. And the wife of TV Dr Michael Mosley has paid tribute to her husband, whose body was found on a Greek island yesterday morning. Claire Mosley described Michael as a wonderful man and says she takes comfort in the fact he very nearly made it.
Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Stacey Cooper, is with us now, launching your manifesto today. Give us the headlines.
Well, the Liberal Democrat manifesto is a manifesto to save our NHS and social care. We will have some big, bold pledges on boosting GP numbers, on improving cancer survival rates, ending the access crisis to NHS dentists. And all of this, we're saying, is going to cost an additional £9 billion per year. And we're going to raise that by looking to the big banks and to the billionaires.
Looking at those that know about these things, they're saying 9 billion rescue packages, certainly on the light side.
Well, I think this is a very significant investment that's going to help us recruit an additional 8,000 GPs. We do think it can end the access crisis to NHS dentists. These sums of money could have a really transformational effect in terms of improving our public health and primary care, so that fundamentally, when people want to see a GP and a dentist, and they need to see a GP and dentist, they can see a GP and a dentist.
You've ruled out raising income tax, national insurance and VAT. So what will you be increasing?
Well, we've said for a long time that during a cost of living crisis, it would be the wrong thing to do to look to struggling families to pay more tax. And so that's why, for example, this £9 billion that we want to spend on the NHS and social care, £4 billion of that would come from reversing the tax cut that the Conservatives gave to the big banks. And the other 5 billion would come from closing what is effectively a loophole in capital gains tax, which would affect the 0.1% richest people in the country.
Tell me more about that.
Yes, so capital gains tax at the moment only has sort of it has two rates of tax. What we want to do is actually simplify capital gains tax and make it a lot fairer. So we'll separate it out from income tax and treat it in its own right. We'll make it fairer by allowing a bigger allowance for introducing an allowance for inflation and increasing the tax-free threshold from £3,000 to £5,000, and then we'll make sure that people who are earning the most or getting the most from capital gains pay a higher rate of tax. So it'll be the 0.1% richest people who will pay more.
So who's that going to impact and under what circumstances?
Well, capital gains is obviously when you sell an asset. So if you're selling your shares, for example, or you have a property portfolio, your own home isn't included. But for people who are selling those shares or something from their property portfolio, depending on how much money they get in a particular year, they'll have to pay a particular percentage. But what we want to do is make it fairer. And I think most people, if they look at the current system of capital gains tax, would be really shocked to think that a nurse, for example, who pays about 20% tax on their salary is paying the same kind of tax rate as somebody who might get £1 million in capital gains after selling off their shares or property. And we think that's unfair. So we're saying there should be a higher rate of tax for people who have those really, really big sums of money brought in by the 0.1% wealthiest people in the country.
So pensioners who potentially make money on dividends, they might be impacted?
I think most ordinary pensioners would not be bringing in the sums of money we're talking about. The way that they would be impacted would be that it would actually be fairer for them. So because we are introducing an inflation allowance and we would be increasing the tax-free threshold, actually most people would see, people who are paying capital gains at the moment, 2/3 of them would see that amount either stay the same or go down. It's the 0.1% of the richest people who would end up paying more.
Talk to me about your boss and some of the stunts that he's been doing over the last couple of weeks or so, falling into lakes, going down water slides, playing with dinosaurs. Do you think that people see the light-hearted side of that, or do they think that's a crazy party, you don't want anything to do with them?
Well, I think a lot of people have seen this election as being quite scrappy between other parties. And when they look at Ed Davey's stunts, what they can see is that we take our politics very seriously, but we don't take ourselves very seriously. And every time we do a stunt, it does come with a message. So when he was falling off the boards in Lake Windermere, it came with a very serious message about how we want to put an end to raw sewage dumping. When Ed was on the water park, it came with a message about mental health and the fact we want to put a mental health practitioner into every single primary and secondary school. And so these stunts do come with a message, but fundamentally today what we're saying is our manifesto is a manifesto to save the NHS and social care.
You shout loudly, most certainly, but I mean, after boundary changes, you're only defending an 8 seats in the whole of the House of Commons out of 650.
Well, we're in second place to the Conservatives in 80 seats around the country, and we're hoping very much to win as many of those as possible. So I know there are millions of voters right now who are making up their minds how they're going to vote, but we are very hopeful that we can make gains in those blue wall areas where Liberal Democrats are the key challengers to the Conservatives.
During a by-election, it's seen as a tactical vote. During a general election, it's seen as a wasted vote.
No, I don't think that's the case. If you look not just at our by-election wins, we've had 4 stunning by-election wins. We've done really well in local elections as well. And the way we Liberal Democrats campaign, we often use our record in local government to build on that and to then win parliamentary seats. And at the last set of local elections, we got some really good results in places like Tunbridge Wells and Wokingham and Winchester and South Cambridgeshire. So we're really hopeful that in places like that, we can make some gains in this general election.
Just a thought before I let you go. Prime Minister's getting quite a kicking, isn't he, over what happened on the Normandy beach at the end of last week. Is that fair?
I think it is fair. I think it was an outrageous thing to do. I think he's brought shame on the office of Prime Minister. And for anybody who has had a relative who either died and fought and died or fought and survived, I think they'll find it really quite a personal insult that he effectively turned his back on some of the veterans who were there.
OK, Daisy Cooper, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks very much. Good luck with the launch later on. Thanks a lot. Let's bring in Bridget Phillipson now, should we, Shadow Education Secretary. It's always great to talk to you, Bridget Phillipson. Thanks for taking the time. Let's just pick up on that before we move on to other stuff. Do you think he's getting an unnecessary kicking, the Prime Minister, over what happened in Normandy?
I think what happened was incredibly disrespectful, and we heard directly from veterans who felt it was the wrong thing for the Prime Minister to have done, and I would agree with them. It's an important moment for our country to remember those who gave their lives and those who served, and the responsibility does fall to the Prime Minister to make sure that our country is properly represented at such commemorations.
I'm just reading in the papers this morning, Bridget Phillipson, that it's been reported that Labour has abandoned plans to bring back a lifetime cap on tax-free pension savings. Is that true?
So it wouldn't have been our priority to make that change, but the government have created an awful lot of uncertainty for people who are looking towards retirement. So no, we wouldn't be bringing that back, and that's about making sure we've got stability and security for people going into this election.
You're also pledging not to raise income tax, national insurance, VAT, corporation tax. Is that wise for you to do that before you've seen the books?
We want to be clear with people that an incoming Labour government will not raise income tax, will not raise national insurance contributions and will not raise VAT, because we know how hard it's been recently for people, that working people are facing taxes at the highest level for 70 years. That's putting families and pensioners across our country under enormous pressure. But it's also why growing our economy is central to the work that a Labour government will be doing if we win the trust of the British people, because it's only through growth that we'll have more money to invest in our public services. But as an initial step, we have set out a number of ways we would make changes to put in at that down payment into our public services. So take, for example, around schools, we would end the VAT exemptions that private schools enjoy, and we put that money directly into 6,500 more teachers, into more mental health support, and into what I'm setting out today around Labour's plan for early years and childcare.
OK, when you talk about VAT on schools, Emily Thornberry yesterday says that Labour's plans for VAT on private school fees could see larger classes in state schools.
Well, I'm afraid that's not right, because what we're seeing at the moment is a falling number of young people arriving at our state schools. We've got falling pupil rolls, and actually the challenges that schools are facing are quite different at the moment. Many are having to consider merging or closing. That's starting to happen in some parts of our country and is likely to happen elsewhere. And if we take primary schools, for example, we've got 600,000 spare primary school places at the moment. That's due to rise to 800,000 by 2027. And that's why what I'm setting out today is about Labour's plan to deliver for early years, to make sure we've got more nurseries. And we would open 3,000 new nurseries in primary schools using that space that we can upgrade that's opening up because of that shift in pupil numbers, to deliver better life chances for our children and to make sure that parents can access the childcare support that they've been promised.
So Emily Thornberry misspoke?
She did, I'm afraid. That's not our position. That's not how things are at the moment. And our focus is on how we would use that money raised by ending tax breaks that private schools enjoy to improve state provision, which is where the vast majority of your viewers will send their children to school.
And as far as primary schools are concerned, because I know you want to speak about them specifically, there's plenty of spare capacity, is there, for children's places in classrooms, kitchens, playgrounds?
As I say, there's currently 600,000 spare primary places. That's due to rise significantly as the years go on. So the challenge actually is about how we manage that process. And what I'm setting out today is how a Labour government, if we secure the trust of the British people, will deliver for early years. We'll make sure that our children get a brilliant start in life. It will be my number one priority if I were Education Secretary, and we will use that space that's opening up to upgrade it, to give schools what they need to deliver more nursery provision and to provide better life chances for children, because I think people do recognise that if children arrive at reception having had a really great start and a strong early years education, it sets up our children to succeed all their lives long. And I'm determined that if we want to deliver high and rising standards across our schools, it has to start early. It has to start when our children are young.
One of the political team here pointed out to me this morning that you said a couple of years ago that you'd get rid of the system of free hours at nurseries, saying it wasn't working. Do you still think that?
I think the current system that we've got at the moment, I mean, the government announced further changes following on from that, and that's not quite how I would have put my position. The government announced further changes in last year's budget, a further expansion of a childcare entitlement to parents. However, what they didn't do was set out a plan to deliver it. What I'm setting out today is the first stage that a Labour government would develop around opening up more provision, creating more places, so over 3,000 new nursery classes. That would generate 100,000 extra childcare places. That would make a tremendous difference for parents. And alongside that, If we win the next election, in the first year of a Labour government, we will publish an early years strategy to make sure that we've got the workforce we need, we've got the standards we need and the progression that we need. Early years has to be the focus of the work of an incoming Labour government because it is where we make the biggest difference to children's life chances. And I'm absolutely determined, more determined than ever, that that's what we will do if we form the next government.
A new poll out this morning suggesting that the public are doubtful that Britain will improve if you win. That's not a very positive start, is it?
I mean, what I hear from voters right across the country, and I've been out campaigning during this election right across England, is that people just feel that everything at the moment is really broken, that they can't get a GP appointment. If they ring the police, nobody comes. Or, in the case of education, they can't get the childcare place that they've been promised. So I'm not surprised that people are losing faith in politics to deliver. But I believe that government can be a force for good in people's lives, and the first steps that we've set out would address all of those concerns that voters have, would address their priorities and very much speak to what people want to see happen. But I do recognise that after 14 years of failure, a Labour government would have a big job ahead of us if people vote for us, and we're out campaigning every single day, earning the trust of the British people, fighting hard for every single vote.
Will the party increase fuel duty if you win the election?
We have no plans to increase taxes on working people. We already think they are too high, and our focus as a government and Rachel Reeves' focus as our Chancellor, if we form that next government, will be on driving growth so that we don't have to increase taxes.
Stamp duty?
No plans on that either.
Council tax?
Same again?
Capital gains?
No. I mean, we can go through all of these, but the answer, I'm afraid, will be the same. We've got no plans to increase taxes.
I'm sure it's not, I'm afraid. I'm sure people will be thrilled to hear that. So there'll be no... It's just when you say working people, people always think, oh, they're waiting for the other boot to fall. What does that actually mean? Does that mean everybody that works, no matter how much they earn?
It means people that go out to work for a living and have faced huge tax increases under the Conservatives, where they've risen to the highest point in 70 years. I don't think that's fair or sustainable, but it does bring home why we have to have a real sharp focus on growing our economy so that we can make further investment in the areas that really matter to voters, like schools and hospitals, for example.
OK. Good to see you as always. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you.
The realm's only hope is in a leader strong enough to unite it.
All fired up for a night on the red carpet. The stars of Sky News' favourite fantasy series head to Leicester Square.
And now it's coming from both sides and it's moving this way.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that the boat is seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world.
I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
That's it. It got us then.
There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits coming in still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news.
Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at her arms, I can put my entire hand round.
This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Mother Nature is
can be vicious, absolutely savage.
The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa!
Close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
Are you about this upcoming general election and the impact that it might have on you? Dr. Mark Rackley, adolescent and adult psychologist, is with us now. Morning.
Good morning.
How worried are people?
Very. So this is something that's in the collective mindset at the moment because it's all around us, and the conversations that we're having this morning and people are having in the pubs and with their families is about the election and about change. And of course, change is inevitable. But when we're anticipating change, then change can be negative change. And so when we become anxious, we're anticipating that negative change is coming down the road. And so with this election coming up, then the conversations around the negative change, the possible personal change it's going to bring to people's lives is creating that anxiety. So it's about worry, but also about, well, what's going to happen to me? How is this going to affect me and my family?
So are there specifics?
Yeah, so it's interesting, because I'm an adolescent psychologist, some of my young patients have been anxious about national service, because this is a conversation, of course, which is totally unique. Like none of them have ever spoken about that with each other. It's not been around for a long time. So with the young people, yes, they're anxious about that. And then with what I'm hearing from my more adult patients is things like money, NHS, but also how it's going to affect their bank balances, but also their children. So there's a lot of anxiety around, with the young people and with older people, around how is this going to affect my life. So it's very personal, actually.
But was there for us, as far as that's the second aspect of what you were saying is concerned. So has that changed at all? Or? Yeah, because we're living in a post-COVID world. We're all a bit more sensitive to change because we got thrown into kind of horrible change that we just had to get on with. So certainly, like, now we kind of just want things to be okay, and we want things to settle down and no more surprises. So, but unfortunately, when it comes to changes of government, inevitably that's going to involve change in our lives, and change that maybe we will struggle to adapt to, especially if it's negative change. So what advice do you give people?
Right. First of all, change it's inevitable we're going to go through change. So when we're dealing with change, it's important to put it in perspective. So try not to predict what the change is going to look like. Try and accept the change, because the change is coming. But very much...
How do you do that?
So trying to stay in the moment. So working with the change that's happening on a moment-by-moment basis and not running too much into the future. Where we tend to get stuck is when we go into anticipatory anxiety. So we come up with things in our head and we play out scenarios in our head that we think, that's going to happen, or it's going to work out like this. And what that does then is it puts the brain into a fear-based response. So we're now scared of the change. But actually, the change isn't real. It's in our minds. So it's remembering that when we're anticipating, that not to run too far into the future, but to stay in the here and now. And to focus as well on too that the change, yes, it's coming, but we're not powerless when it comes to change. We do have a certain amount of power of what we can do with our lives.
Acceptance?
Acceptance is important, yes, very much so. And also working on things like gratitude is a great one. So being grateful for what you have and focusing on the positives in your life, because inevitably when we're dealing with anxiety, we're focusing on the negatives.
And if you've got good health, you've got everything.
Oh, absolutely. So bigger picture stuff. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Good to see you, Doctor. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Will's standing by for us this morning. Hi, Will. Good morning. What have you got this morning for us?
Very good morning to you as well, Kay. Well, of course, we'll be focused on trying to solve the anxieties of our viewers around the election campaign and, of course, waiting to see if we're going to see the Prime Minister. Being a little harsh there, of course, we did see the Prime Minister over the weekend on Saturday. He was out and about taking a day of rest on Sunday, which is fair enough. But he hasn't done a proper interview since Sam Coates' tussle with him on Friday. And I think if he dodged conversations with journalists again today, then there'd be real questions posed. So we'll be looking out for the Prime Minister. Of course, it is Manifesto Week. Will that take the attention off his D-Day blunder? We'll see. Lib Dem's manifesto launch is today at 11. We'll have that live. The focus will turn to the other parties as the week goes on. I have to say, I think the big anxiety of the election campaign is whether we really have got clear answers, got to the heart of what Starmer and Sunak would really represent if they led the country in the next Parliament. So I'm also still really focused on Wednesday night, where we'll get those answers perhaps for the first time on this election campaign with the Sky News debate.
Great question. We will see, won't we? With Beth on Wednesday night. For now, thanks very much, Will. Thank you. Let's talk about the stars of Sky Atlantic's House of the Dragon will walk the red carpet tonight ahead of the release of the second series.
The realm's only hope is in a leader strong enough to unite it.
Matt Smith and Olivia Cook will be among those marking the launch of the next instalment of the hit Game of Thrones spin-off. Back in Westeros, the show returns to the story of the House of Targaryen, where a battle for
You're not
succession...
a fan, are you?
No, I did. I honestly... Matt Smith was incredible in the first series.
Was he?
So good. Charlie will be even more excited than I am.
Really?
Yeah.
Are you a fan?
Yes.
Great.
Love it. Watched it all. Can't wait. And I found the Targaryens fascinating. Are you a fan?
I'm more a Judge Judy fan myself.
Fair enough. I respect that. I respect that.
Why are you laughing?
Judge Judy, there's a reference.
Yeah, I love Judge Judy.
Yeah,
I don't watch Judge Judy.
I used to watch Judge Judy.
As I always say to you, we can't be friends. morning, everyone. It's 8 o'clock. Coming up on the programme for you this morning, how a cyber attack has left the NHS in urgent need of blood donations.
Plus, it's another big week in the election campaign with healthcare, schools and taxes all top of the agenda. We'll tell you what the main parties have to say for themselves this morning.
Plus, concern for one of the legends of the game, former Liverpool captain Alan Hansen, remains seriously ill in hospital.
It's Monday, the 10th of June. The NHS urgently appeals for type O blood donors after a cyber attack on London hospitals. The wife of Dr. Michael Mosley pays tribute to her brilliant husband. As it emerges, he fell just yards from safety. Shooting ahead, the Liberal Democrats will be the first party to launch their manifesto this morning. Not so much fun for the Prime Minister, though, criticised again this morning over his D-Day gaffe. I'm asking you how you felt, or what was your reaction when you heard the news?
Well, I was surprised and disappointed, but he apologised.
President Macron is accused of gambling with French democracy by calling a snap election after his party is obliterated by the far right in European polls.
The realm's only hope is in a leader strong enough to unite it.
And are you ready for Dragons? The new series of the Game of Thrones spin-off premieres this evening. We're going to be talking about blood, aren't we, in just a few moments' time. NHS is urgently appealing for type O blood donors after a cyber attack on hospitals in London. The blood and transplant service specifically needs donors who are O positive or O negative because these blood types can be given to all patients. The cyber attack has meant that hospitals are having to make manual checks, which take longer. Tom's here. Tell me more, Tom.
Yeah, so you remember there was this cyber attack about a week ago, which affected the pathology services for a number of hospitals across the southeast of London and primary care as well. The most important impact apparently has been on blood typing. So getting the patient's blood results turned around quickly is now having to be done on paper. The results walked back and forward through hospitals because the IT system that sends those results from the lab to the bedside is still down 6 days after that attack took place. And in that situation, it doesn't leave doctors, certainly in an emergency, much option other than to use O-type blood. So if you, regardless of your blood type, whether it's A, B or AB, if you can safely receive O group blood. So it's called the universal donor. So there's been an increase in demand as a result of the cyber attack for this type of blood. And I've just been speaking to NHS Blood and Transplant. They like to keep 6 days of stock available, and they can move blood around the country, so they've been bringing blood into London where the demand has been, but they're down to 3.6 days for O positive and only 2.4 days for O negative. So they're not at absolute critical point yet, but they are running well below their kind of comfort zone for these bloods, and they need more. So the appeal is going out, if you're an O type, existing blood donors, about 800,000 people in the UK who regularly donate blood, please come forward and give a donation. If you haven't donated before, come down. There's a sort of 35% chance you're O positive anyway. O negative is a bit rarer, but they want to come forward. I think it's also pointing sort of more widely away from the immediate issue facing the blood service, how critically dependent we are now on some of these IT systems. One thing like this goes down, it's a minor cog in this huge NHS IT machine, but it can have significant impacts on the front line. And for people donating blood, they think it might take weeks now to recover from the impact of this cyber attack.
So, how do people help?
What they can do is they can, if they're an existing blood donor, go and find a blood slot. You'll have to do that on the NHS Blood and Transplant website. If you're not a donor, go online, get those details, register as a donor. It's a very simple process to do, and you can usually get an appointment on the same day or within days. I think there's 13,000 appointment slots this week alone ready to be filled, so they're asking people to come forward and use one of those. I'm a regular blood donor. It's a painless and pretty simple procedure. There's a little bit of paperwork ahead of time that they need to fill out, but once you're in the system, it's a simple and friendly and I think a very noble thing to do as well.
And you get a biscuit.
You still get a biscuit.
I know.
And the choice, I have to say, it's improved significantly
Custard creams
since
and
I started. Yeah.
OK, so that's what they need to do. Look it up on the website and donate if you possibly can.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Meantime, Michael Mosley's wife has described her family's heartbreak after his body was found on the Greek island of Symi after several days of searching. In a moment, we'll speak to Sadia. But first, this is her report, which contains pictures of Dr. Mosley being taken away by a recovery team.
It was as if the island of Symi fell silent. A man's body was carefully wrapped before being brought down to the shore. A 50-metre journey he didn't end up making himself. Greek authorities say the body is that of Michael Mosley, a doctor and health reporter who frequented our airwaves for years. Closely following his body, plastic bags holding his belongings, a cap he was wearing, and his backpack. It brought a sombre end to a search that had lasted 4 days and 4 nights, the longest and most unbearable for his family. Today, his wife said, "We're taking comfort in the fact that he so nearly made it. He did an incredible climb, took the wrong route and collapsed where he couldn't be easily seen by the extensive search team. Michael was an adventurous man. It's part of what made him so special. I feel so lucky to have our children and my amazing friends. Most of all, I feel so lucky to have had this life with Michael."
Behind me, that is St Nicholas Beach, where Dr. Mosley started his journey on Wednesday. He then walked towards Pedi Marina, where he was last seen on CCTV. And police believe he carried on walking north, and you can see just how the terrain changes to become much more rocky.
A helicopter had hovered over the area for hours, but failed to spot anything. In the end, it was this local journalist who caught it on camera.
We were a little bit closer, about 200 meters from the shot. I also zoomed in. It was again shaky. I wasn't 100% sure, but I told them, I think there's something there. And with an iPhone, we took a photo and we zoomed. And there was the body. He was laying down with his hand on his belly, the watch, and he's carrying his bag on the other hand.
It was the end nobody had wanted.
I wish I never got the shot and the person was alive. I'm really sorry for the family.
Dr. Mosley's body has been taken to the island of Rhodes. A post-mortem and formal identification is to follow.
Sadia with us now. It's such a tragedy. We were just talking about how fragile life is, Sadia.
Yeah, and so many questions still are left unanswered, but perhaps a sense of closure for Dr. Mosley's family that he has at least been found. We heard earlier in the week about their anguish and how much anxiety they had about what might have happened to him. And yesterday we saw the coroner arrive with her team and remove the body from the site where it had been found. And she spent a long time taking photographs and picking up other items and putting them into plastic bags. I think these are all clues about what might have happened to him. Because, of course, there are reports this morning that he may have stumbled and fallen. So lots to emerge from that. The coroner's office isn't actually on this island, it's in Rhodes. And that's where the body's been taken, and that's where the examination is happening. And we understand that's where the family will help to identify the body as well. And a lot of people on this island who are part of the search and rescue team, who have their other normal day jobs, like working in pizza restaurants and coach drivers, all waiting to find out what happened, because this is something that has really taken over this island. And very much lots of people were involved in trying to find him and were hoping that it would be a successful rescue.
Indeed so. Sadia, thank you. Big week on the election trail, with all the major parties expected to launch their manifesto in the coming days. We also expect to hear from the Prime Minister later on. The Policing Minister, Philp, has told this programme that he was surprised and disappointed by his D-Day gaffe.
Obviously, it was a mistake. I mean, to be fair...
What was your reaction?
Well, to be fair to the Prime Minister, he did obviously attend all the events in the UK and met veterans, and he attended the British-hosted events in Normandy and met British veterans there.
President Biden, President Macron,
yeah, but he should have gone to the final one. That's right, and he's apologised.
Yeah, but I'm asking you how you felt, or what was your reaction when you heard the news?
Well, I was surprised and disappointed, but he apologised, and I think if you look at his track record, looking after veterans and funding the armed services. He's got a good track record that he can be proud of, a track record the party can be proud of, and a track record the country can be proud of.
How soon before he can get past this?
It's a really good question, Kay. It looks like this is going to have quite a long tail when it comes to electioneering gaffes. It just doesn't feel like it's going away. And partly, you know, it is being weaponised by other parties, especially, for instance, Nigel Farage has been weaponising it, saying it's indicative that, you know, the Prime Minister is out of touch, you know, he's too privileged and he doesn't understand the British people. And that is one of the kind of almost like trying to be a selling point for the Reform Party. So you can see how certain parties are going to have an interest in this dragging on as long as possible. But I do also think that it is going to drag on purely because it is such a big mistake. And the Prime Minister was very clear it was a big mistake, the fact that he came out so quickly and apologised about it. But at the same time, I mean, he will be keen as anything to try and move the conversation on, start talking about policy announcements. We are going to get the Conservative Party manifesto tomorrow. If there's potentially a big tax giveaway or something quite eye-catching in that, for instance, then he'll be hoping that potentially it could move the agenda on. But nonetheless, it does feel it's going to potentially be a topic of conversation for a while, especially because some of the polling that we saw didn't include, was done before this gaffe. So it'll be interesting to see how and if it impacts on the polling of the public as well.
And Emily Thornberry made a bit of a mistake as well.
Yes. So Bridget Phillipson on the record this morning. Shadow Education Secretary, basically calling out Emily Thornberry, saying her interview that she did over the weekend was incorrect, where she said that the VAT break that private schools enjoy, that will be abolished under the Labour Party if they win the election, would potentially increase class sizes in state schools. And Bridget Phillipson said, no, that's not the case.
Well, I'm afraid that's not right, because what we're seeing at the moment is a falling number of young people arriving at our state schools. We've got falling pupil rolls, and actually the challenges that schools are facing are quite different at the moment. Many are having to consider merging or closing. That's starting to happen in some parts of our country and is likely to happen elsewhere.
So it's fascinating. You can see there Emily Thornberry clearly, as Bridget Phillipson said, misspoke, and that is not policy. And Labour are very, very, very keen to set the record straight on that. They don't want to set the cat amongst the pigeons, as it were, when it comes to the private school policy that's already...
They don't usually... Sorry to interrupt. They don't usually let their colleagues swing in the wind like that. I was surprised she was as...
My assumption is, to an extent, she was, you know, freelancing or... it's getting slightly too creative with the policy and then has had to row back and got a bit carried away. And some would argue, well, surely that would make sense logically. If you're going to have more people coming into the state sector, surely you're going to have bigger classes. Otherwise, how are you going to accommodate for them? So potentially it was as she was making an assumption without double-checking the detail. And Bridget Phillipson was saying here, because we have a falling birth rate, actually we have capacity in primary schools, we don't have to worry about that. What's interesting is, and we see this more in the Conservative Party than the Labour Party, a conversation around the falling birth rate and why it's happening. And you get certain factions of the Conservative Party who are concerned about a falling birth rate because they feel it's going to potentially have a time bomb later in life where we have less young people and lots of old people and not enough young people to pay for them. And that could be a concern when it comes to the state pension, for instance. But Labour don't like to talk about that too much.
Not yet.
Existential discussions on a Monday morning.
Welcome to politics.
Let's bring you some of the days on the news, shall we?
Please.
Yes, let's turn our attention to Israel, because the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, looking more isolated this morning after the resignation of Benny Gantz from the War Cabinet. Our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, has more.
Firstly, I think it was inevitable that Gantz was going to go. He had delivered an ultimatum to Benjamin Netanyahu. He had demanded that progress be made on a number of issues surrounding the war in Gaza. One was progress on the release of hostages. Another was to try and resolve what is going on the northern border between Hezbollah and Israel. But ultimately, Netanyahu had made very little progress on any of those demands. And so Gantz was always going to then withdraw himself and his party from the government of national unity that was set up after October the 7th. He was supposed to do it on Saturday when the deadline expired, but he postponed it by 24 hours because of that successful hostage raid in Gaza that brought 4 of the hostages out alive. So what does it mean now? Well, Gantz, freed from any restrictions that he might have felt while serving in the wartime government, will presumably become far more critical of Netanyahu, and he will have inside knowledge about how the war has been fought and directed, and he, we expect, will use that against Netanyahu. He will call, as he did last night, for fresh elections. I think Netanyahu will continue to resist that.
Meanwhile, the inquest into the death of the teenage motorcyclist Harry Dunn begins this morning. Harry died just hours after he was knocked off his bike near RF Croughton in 2019. Former US spy Anne Secoulis admitted driving on the wrong side of the road and was handed an 8-month suspended sentence. The inquest is expected to address road safety issues outside US military bases here in the UK. Cat owners in England could face a fine of up to £500. That's if they fail to microchip their pet. Now, a legal requirement for cats to be microchipped before they're 20 weeks old. Animal charities say it will be easier for lost, stray or stolen felines to be reunited with their owners.
The French President, Emmanuel Macron, has dissolved the French Parliament and announced a snap poll after his party suffered a crushing loss to the French far right in the European parliamentary elections. Adam Parsons has more.
In France, a seismic moment. The far-right Rassemblement National party on its way to a crushing victory in the country's European election. They pushed President Macron's Renaissance party into a distant second place, winning more than twice as many votes. Macron's response? Dissolving Parliament and calling fresh elections.
La montée des nationalistes, des démagogues, est un danger pour notre nation.
The rise in nationalists poses a danger to the nation.
For so many years, Marine Le Pen has been the mainstay of the French far right, but never has she seen a victory as remarkable as this. 94% of constituencies voted for her party.
Je ne peux que saluer cette décision qui s'inscrit dans la logique.
I can only welcome this decision, which is in line with the logic of the institutions of the Fifth Republic. We're ready for it. After the legislative elections of 2022, which designated the National Rally Party as the main parliamentary opponent, these European elections confirm our movement as the major force for change in France.
She and party president Jordan Bardella have smoothed the edge of their politics. Now the far right is on top.
The catalyst for President Macron's decision were the elections for this place, the European Parliament. And we have seen a surge in support for nationalist and far-right parties. But in France, that surge has turned into a shockwave. In Brussels, an election party for young liberals and a sense of shock at Macron's move.
I think he's really cynical and he's playing a dangerous game because I think he's risking to play out the security and the stability of French democracy.
On a night of turbulence, the Belgian Prime Minister also announced that he would be resigning following bad results. And in Paris, protests. The Rassemblement National may spark anger, but the fact is they won this election by a mile. Across France, there's a desire for change. This nation may just have fallen out of love with its president.
Adam joining us now. He's in northern France this morning, and Siobhan is in Berlin. Adam, to you. First of all, snap election.
Yeah, a really big shock, I think, for the French nation. This is Hénin-Beaumont. This is the absolute centre of support, not just for Rassemblement National, but for Marine Le Pen. This is where she comes to vote. And I think in this place there is going to be a frisson of excitement because they believe this is the moment when Marine Le Pen will go from the big voice, effectively the challenger, to being in the mainstream. This is a huge gamble by Macron. I think he believes that the French nation might, in his terms, see sense, that they might pull back from the precipice and roll in behind his centrist policies. That is a big shout because it assumes that people vote different in European elections than domestic.
in reality, most people in European elections are guided by domestic concerns. And if he gets as hefty a defeat in the National Assembly election at the end of this month, start of July, as he just have, he's going to have to make concessions. And that could well mean effectively bringing the wolf into his own tent, giving the job of Prime Minister to either Marine Le Pen or Jordan Bardella, her young protege, the 28-year-old president of the Rassemblement National. Imagine that. Marine Le Pen could, in a matter of weeks, potentially be the Prime Minister of France.
Siobhan standing by in Berlin for his far-right supporters in Germany, keeping a close eye on what's happening in France, I'm guessing. Good morning, Siobhan.
Morning, Kay. Exactly. Let me give you a bite-sized breakdown of the rest of the EU election. So winners first. As we've been talking about, a surge in the far right in France, where Adam is, a national rally getting around a third of the votes. In Italy, for example, Giorgia Meloni securing her position both at home and on the European stage. And here in Germany, as you were saying, the Alternative for Germany party coming in second, pushing Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor's party, into third with their lowest showing ever. So a really bad day for the Chancellor. And one of the reasons is because of lots of young people voting. 16-year-olds could vote here for the first time. And also because of immigration and the cost of living. Now, the losers across Europe are the Greens. They're predicted to lose around 18 seats, potentially because people have changed their priorities with the war in Ukraine, for example, since 2019. The other thing, just to flag to viewers that they might not be seeing because of these headlines about the surge in the far right, is the fact that it's the centre-right party which have actually made the strongest gains. The European People's Party, under Ursula von der Leyen, has strengthened its control over the European Parliament.
OK, for now, thanks. I want to tell you about Alan Hansen, former Liverpool captain. He was so much more than that, he was a legend. Morning, Emma, what's happening?
Yeah, so news emerging yesterday afternoon from Liverpool Football Club that Alan Hansen was seriously ill in hospital. So this is a man who joined the club from Partick Thistle in 1977, and during a real golden era for Liverpool. He was part of the team that won 8 league titles, 3 European Cups, 2 FA Cups, and went on to retire in 1991. Of course, he played 26 times for his country, for Scotland. He then went on to become a pundit, and you didn't have to be a football fan to recognise Alan Hansen on the telly. And he didn't hold back.
He did not?
No, he was quite happy to call the play that he saw on the pitch diabolical, for example. So yesterday, that statement coming from Liverpool Football Club, this is what it said. Jockey, as he was known by teammates, is in the top 10 for all-time appearances for the club, having played 620 matches. And the Scottish centre-back also served as Liverpool skipper for 4 seasons. The club is currently in contact with Alan's family to provide our support at this difficult time. And our thoughts, wishes and hopes are with Alan and all of the Hansen family. And as you would expect, a lot of messages of support for Alan and his family. One of them from his co-host, former footballer himself, Gary Lineker, who has described the horrendous news, sending his love to the family. And also on Match of the Day's X account, thoughts and prayers with Alan and his family. And
any young man, isn't he?
68. 68, very young man, and this seems to be quite a shocking news. But any updates on his condition are going to come through the club.
OK, for now, thank you. Another shock over the weekend, of course, was what happened to Dr Michael Mosley, and that dominates all of the front pages this morning. Let's start with the Express. Heartbroken wife of TV doctor. He so nearly made it. Looking at the front page of the Daily Mail, he was a contributor, of course, to the Mail. My brilliant husband, Michael, so very nearly made it. One more newspaper for you. The Mirror. He so very nearly made it. If you look at the images, he was about 200 feet away from safety. That's where his body was discovered, now been taken to Rhodes for a post-mortem. Big challenges as far as the blood service is concerned here in London at the moment after a cyber attack a week ago. And Professor D is with us. Professor D, forgive me, how do I pronounce your surname?
Thiruchelvam.
Thank you very much indeed. Chief Nursing Officer at NHS Blood and Transplant. What's the problem?
So this week is National Blood Donation Week, and we're taking the opportunity to ask the Great British public to come forward and offer their blood. We're particularly looking for blood type O negative and positive, which are the universal blood types.
OK, why?
So last week there was a cyber attack, as you mentioned in the introduction, and some of the hospitals are asking for an extra quantity of blood during this period. Now, the reason for that is they're having to do manual matching of blood types from donors to patients, and that takes much longer. And we predict that we're going to have an increase requests of blood up until the end of July. So we're going to plan to have more donations coming through to make sure we have enough blood to be able to support the NHS.
How long does blood last for?
Blood lasts for 35 days. So therefore, it's really important we continue to have a constant supply of donations coming through. And those donations are needed for emergency services, for childbirth, and for routine treatment. And our O-type blood supplies are kept on our emergency vehicles and also on the helicopter vehicles for those emergency areas.
OK, so given that you're having to do things by hand, by paper, as it were, at the moment, does that mean that some blood might have to be wasted? Is that why you're so desperate to get blood?
Well, when we don't know what someone's blood type is, it is safest to give O negative, which can be given to anyone, and O positive, which can be given to men or to women who are beyond their childbearing years. So to avoid wastage, we need to have really high supplies of that type of blood. And we really would request that the public come forward. If they already have appointments, please keep them. If you have given blood in the past, do consider coming back. And if you haven't given blood in the past, please contact us.
And if you're not type O, negative or positive, don't come because...
No, please. We would want all blood types to come forward, even if you don't know what your blood type is. We've got 13,000 appointments England-wide available, and within London specifically, we've got 3,400 appointments, and our fixed donor centres have appointments available.
So how do people find out more about them?
So they can contact us on our website on blood.co.uk or call us on 0300 123 23 23.
And what do you say to people who have never given blood before, Professor, and they're a little bit anxious about it?
Well, it's a really simple thing to do. We will do a health screening process, asking you about your lifestyle and your medical history. It takes about an hour, and you get some really nice biscuits and crisps at the end of it.
With cream in the middle.
Sometimes.
Custard creams and everything.
Indeed.
And bourbons, I know. So even if you're not O positive, O negative, do come anyway.
Yes, please.
OK, it's good to see you, Professor. Thank you very much
Thank you.
indeed. Thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News. We're going to be taking a closer look at how the general election campaigns are playing out with Jack and Sam. And the security U-turn that's got airport passengers in a flap this summer.
Westminster may seem far from Grimsby and Cleethorpes, but not for long. With a general election around the corner, we're bringing you Sunak versus Starmer, live from Grimsby. Putting their cases forward and facing questions from a live audience. Who will convince you to give them the keys to this place? The battle for number 10. Get the full story first on Sky News.
The Paddington Bear experience is a sensory immersive experience that's based heavily on the Studio Canal films, where audiences can go into the world of Paddington and explore all the different sights and sounds and iconic locations on an adventure where audiences are there to help celebrate the Marmalade Day Festival, which in our experience happens every day. It's built over about 26,000 square foot at County Hall, which is obviously a very prominent building opposite Big Ben, and gives audiences and family groups a chance to go in and complete lots of challenges and games and help Paddington make sure that Marmalade Day goes off without a hitch. Well, I think that Paddington is, obviously stands for such, good values. And I think, for a bear that that stands for kindness and for being polite and for, you know, the empathy that he shows is something I think we all look to and inspire to. But aside from that, you know, I think that it's continued to be so relevant to so many different generations. Obviously, the new movies have been so successful, bringing Paddington to new audiences. But, you know, it's a 65-year-old brand and is known, you know, for the books and the TV series, and it's been so well looked after. And obviously, there was that iconic moment with the Queen before she passed away, which I think it brought the nation's heart and how much we love that bear. We are opposite, you know, Big Ben, and we're right in the heart of London, very accessible for groups all over the city. But, you know, the experience allows audiences to go into all the different sights and sounds through the Brown's house. They even get to travel over to Peru, which is very relevant with the new film coming out this November called Paddington in Peru. So it's a really fun sensory experience for all the family.
Going to be talking about all sorts of things with Jack and Sam, including their latest podcast. I saw you recording it this morning, so we'll have more on that after today's top stories.
Yes, let's remind you of those, shall we, this morning.
Please.
It's just 8:31 in the morning. Let's tell you about the NHS, first and foremost, launching a major appeal for type O blood types after a cyber attack that affected some of the largest hospitals in London. The ransomware attack means affected hospitals can't match blood from donors as quickly. It's a big week on the election trail, with all the major parties expected to launch their manifestos in the coming days. The Liberal Democrats going first this morning. We also expect to hear from the Prime Minister today. The Policing Minister, Philp, told this programme that he was surprised and disappointed by the Prime Minister's D-Day gaffe. France's President Emmanuel Macron has announced a shock-snap election after his party suffered a huge loss to the far right in elections to the European Parliament. Mr Macron called the rise of nationalists a danger to both France and Europe, but said he couldn't pretend nothing had happened. And the wife of TV Dr Michael Mosley has paid tribute to her husband, whose body was found on a Greek island yesterday morning. Claire Mosley described Michael as a wonderful man and says she takes comfort in the fact that he did nearly make it.
The boys are back in town. In all seriousness, can Sunak get over this massive gaffe?
I mean, he doesn't really have a choice. Look, I think over the weekend there were some who said, can he make it to polling day? But I think the answer is he basically has to. I mean, I heard he had quite a dark night of the soul on Saturday after pulling out early of D-Day on Thursday and those commemorations.
What possessed him?
Look, I think it's a couple of things. The official line is that this fell through the planning cracks between the civil service. But I think a couple of things lie beneath it. He doesn't like this kind of stuff, and I think he chose not to do it. And I think at one point they were considering an even bigger sort of absence from the event. You know, there's reports that Grant Shapps might have gone entirely instead. The French seemed to think he wasn't coming at one point. Now, remember, Kay, when I spoke to him on Friday, he absolutely denied that categorically, so if that turns out to be true, he's in more hot water. But I think it is evidence of a Prime Minister who sometimes doesn't know quite where to land things and have a shortness of touch.
He doesn't like this kind of stuff. 5,000 young men gave their lives on the D-Day beaches. All he had to do was stand there and have his picture taken with some of the leader of the free world, our closest geographical ally, and one of the main leaders of the Commonwealth. How hard can it be?
You know, during an election campaign, I guess politicians can get distracted by what they really care about more than anything, which is getting re-elected. But the Prime Minister's job and duty, first and foremost, is to do his job as the Prime Minister, and that, on D-Day commemorations, is to be there and represent the country and remember the fallen, and that's what he obviously should have done, and he now realises he should have done. The problem for Rishi Sunak politically is that he was obviously going into this election in a really disastrous position to start with. He had to pull off a flawless campaign to try and pull the Tories back to have a fighting chance of winning, or at least, you know, drawing this election. Instead, we've seen gaffe after gaffe, and this one is completely on a different level to standing in the rain when you're announcing an election campaign. This is something that people care rightly very deeply about, and this will be remembered, and that's why Rishi Sunak was feeling so bad at the weekend, because he knows how much damage this has done with the very people, OK, the very people he needs to turn out for the Tory parties on July the 4th.
When I saw him at lunchtime on Friday, and this is a brutal thing to say, Kay, I don't really think he was that sorry. His tone was exasperated, not somebody who, like Boris Johnson after Partygate and the Prince Philip stories, actually looked like they felt some real contrition. There was just a, why are you doing this to me, air about him. And I think that's the thing that worries Tory candidates standing for re-election more than anything else.
I think the other thing that worries them, Kay, is the lack of political judgment shown here to have done this, and not just, you know, on the whim. You know, a whole team of people will have decided his diary last week with him agreeing it. So they've all sat down together and said, yeah, it's fine, just let David Cameron do that. That lack of political judgment may be evidenced again in the weeks ahead. We've got 3 or 4 more weeks of campaigning to go. What's the next mistake going to look like?
As I said on Friday, I think on Twitter, Cameron surely not without guilt as far as this is concerned. He is a seasoned politician. He would have known to say, mate, stay here.
So the question that David Cameron seems to have let it be known is that he can only do so much. He exists because Rishi Sunak wanted to subcontract exactly this sort of thing to him. And whilst David Cameron, Lord Cameron, can see the optics of what's going on, and I'm sure wouldn't have made the same mistake, I don't think, my understanding from the briefings over the weekend, is that he feels that he can change the way Downing Street operates in these scenarios. So no doubt he was against what Rishi Sunak said, but what does that count for when there's a tight-knit circle, incredibly closed and controlled around Rishi Sunak? You know, I think the most likely thing is Cameron just thought, I can't get through, what can I do?
So what does that say about a Sunak, who's never won an election, when he's not listening to somebody that he's brought in to listen to?
Well, exactly. And one of the criticisms, I mean, it's been a strength of Downing Street in a way, this very close-knit circle. They've been able to keep things quiet. The snap election, they're bringing back David Cameron. We've talked about this before. They're very good at not leaking stuff. But the flip side of that is there aren't always enough voices, wise counsel speaking in and saying, look, maybe this isn't a good idea. I have to say, though, surely if David Cameron picks up the phone to him and says, look, you cannot do this, I've been there, this is super important, he would have listened. I don't believe David Cameron can have pushed it as hard as he should have done, because Rishi Sunak would have listened.
We're only reading the briefings after the effect. We don't know that happened.
Indeed.
OK, tell me what's in the podcast today.
So it's the Liberal Democrats' manifesto launch. Ed Davey has melded stunts
Enough stunts, Ed, enough.
But with a personal story about caring for his disabled son, and looking after his mother, who had cancer when he was a teenager, who died when she was a teenager. And the manifesto, I think, will reflect that. It puts raising money for the NHS at the heart of that manifesto. But, you know, is it all just silliness? Is it all just, you know, crashing into the water? I think the problem for Ed Davey is that the problems that they're seeking to fix, particularly on the NHS and social care, were problems of the coalition government that he and the Liberal Democrats were part of, whether it was the funding decisions or that massive reorganisation, seems to have left the NHS in a bit of a hole, and now they're having to do it. But doesn't he bear some culpability for what happened as he sat there and nodded through things like the spending plans and the reorganisations? He was in that government. What role did he accept he played?
That's totally right. Well, I do think, though, the Lib Dems have been something like the dark horses of this election campaign so far. You know, nobody really paid any attention to them. They had barely a dozen MPs or whatever it is. And they've run a campaign which, as you say, is full of silly stunts, but has got them noticed. The worst thing for a tiny party is that just no one even remembers you're there. Well, we remember they're there. The stuff he's done about his caring for his son is moving, and it really connects with people, obviously, because it should do. And actually, if you look at the big MRP polls, they've got the Lib Dems doing really well. I mean, I don't know if that's what will be borne out in reality, but at the moment, the predictions are they could win a lot of seats. So it's possible that while we all talk about the noise around Nigel Farage, Tory meltdown, Keir Starmer may be Prime Minister, there's another story happening here, maybe, which is a Lib Dem revival. Don't know yet, but it's possible.
A total of 8 seats after by-election.
The YouGov...
what's the word I'm looking for?
The 20...
changing of the election constituency boundaries.
Yes.
Boundary changes. Thanks for helping me out there, Jack.
Didn't know.
But the question is, so the MRP puts them on, for YouGov puts them on 41, but the question is this. Ed Davey's big decision, and this is for the first time in my lifetime, is to make the Liberal Democrats a purely anti-Tory force. They're not really fighting Labour in more than 1 or 2 seats. But the question is, Tory's probably going to be gone in a month. So what's going to be the kind of modus operandi? What's going to be the point of those 41 Liberal Democrat MPs, if that's what's happened, if there's a big Labour landslide? I mean, is any of what we see in the manifesto today actually going to count for anything?
Probably not. I mean, the world where the Lib Dems get to actually affect policy is a world of a hung parliament. And if you believe the polls, we're not headed for a hung parliament. But for the Lib Dems, this is a long-term rebuilding job. You know, in the heady days of Cleggmania or the heights of Charles Kennedy, they were a big presence in Parliament. They were a voice you had to listen to. That all went away after they melted down in 2015. If they can get back to those kind of numbers the polls are predicting, then there's something there for them to build on and keep growing out, and the party essentially would be back. Now, look, we're a few weeks from polling day. This might be total nonsense. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but that's what the polling suggests, and it's an interesting one to watch.
3 weeks on Thursday, I think, something like that. So it's cantering quite close towards us.
24 days.
What does Rishi Sunak have to do to try to start turning this supertanker around?
Well, the first thing he's got to do is at his manifesto launch tomorrow, to Conservatives going on Tuesday, there's got to be no more errors. I mean, the bar's really low, according to Tory candidates that I'm talking to. They're not looking for a game changer now. I mean, there isn't going to be scrapping inheritance tax or pulling out of the European Convention of Human Rights if you thought that that was a solution to a problem. It's going to be incremental, but I think they're thinking now more bomb-proofed rather than whizzy fireworks. No more mistakes, gradually rebuild. And I think that would be a win, because at the moment, every candidate that I'm talking to on the Tory side is simply trying to run on their personal record, but dealing with systems that aren't working, bafflement at the national campaign, and general disappointment.
At least he can rely on Suella Braverman, eh?
Yes, his old friend Suella Braverman.
What is she doing?
Well, she is fighting a different war, shall we say, to the one Rishi Sunak is fighting. He is desperately trying to get re-elected. Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary, of course, who was fired, is looking ahead to beyond the election. She's assuming a big Tory defeat, and she's trying to think about what the Tory party might look like after that. Hopefully, in her view, with her in a very prominent position, maybe the leader, who knows. And so she's
Nigel Farage as well.
She's come out today saying she'd like Nigel Farage to be in that post-election Tory party, which would be a huge...
Needs to win first, doesn't he?
...realignment. Well, that would certainly help his cause. He'd be in Parliament and able to join if he wanted to do it, if they could cut a deal. What would the sort of more centrist side of the Tory party make of that? I mean, you know, it would be a huge restructure for the Tory party, but it's not impossible.
It's going to be the issue in the leadership contest if we get there. Suella Braverman and Robert Jenrick say, admit Nigel Farage. Priti Patel, Kemi Badenoch say, don't admit Nigel Farage. That decision probably will change the course of the Conservative Party's future. So a lot of things are on the table if we end up in the place that currently it feels like we're going to.
They're going to be cats fighting in a bag, aren't they?
They are. It's going to be spectacularly entertaining. If you like watching politicians shout at each other a lot, there's going to be nothing quite like what's going to happen to this Tory party if the defeat is as bad as it looks at the moment.
But they're not going to have the spotlight on them as they have done in the last 8 years, because we're going to have a big new government in that eventuality that is going to take the oxygen out of the room. So they're going to be cats in a sack in the dark.
I don't know. I think it's going to be entertaining enough that you and I will be talking about them quite a lot.
I think that's a distinct possibility. Not quite as entertaining as when Labour open the books and go, how much?
Yeah, I think
they're practising their faces right now.
They are. That's going to hurt everybody quite a lot, I suspect. That moment when they announce the problem is so much worse than we could have thought, and here's all the terrible things that we're going to have to do that we didn't mention before the election. That moment is probably coming down the tracks.
OK. Is there anything that Rishi Sunak and his Conservative Party can do to try and bring this back now, or is it done?
I was chatting to a Tory strategist the other day, and the one thing that they were clinging to, Kay, was this thing that they think is still very much true, which is that when people see Keir Starmer, they don't like him that much. You know, there is not this big love for the leader of the opposition looking likely to be the next Prime Minister. When you talk to people in focus groups, when you poll it, there isn't, you know, you don't meet many people who are like, oh, I just love Keir Starmer so much. And they think that with Keir Starmer becoming more and more under the spotlight over the next 3 weeks, the more people see of him, the Tories hope, the less they will actually like, and therefore there is some opportunity there for them to claw back some ground. The problem with that is that they keep making these huge mistakes that dominate the news cycle for 4 days. I've hardly seen Keir Starmer since the back end of last week because we've all been talking about Rishi Sunak on the beaches, or we're talking about Nigel Farage a few days before that. But if they can the Tories can get the spotlight back on the leader of the opposition, they think there's an opportunity there to close the gap as people sort of say, I'm not too sure about this guy after all.
47% of people told YouGov for a Sky poll they think Keir Starmer would make a bad Prime Minister. They don't think he's going to be a great Prime Minister, but they're still also telling the same pollster they're willing to vote him in a landslide. I don't think that there's much that putting the spotlight on him can do. It is not like 97, but that doesn't mean that a 97-style result isn't going to happen. You don't have to love a political leader to hate the other political leader more and therefore give your vote to the former.
Is there another poll tonight? So the YouGov one, was it once a week? Or?
So Sky, the Sky's YouGov one comes out either tomorrow night or Wednesday morning, depending on when we get it, and basically every Wednesday for the rest of the campaign.
OK, well, let's wait and see. And we can find... You are every day?
We are 5 days a week for the duration of this campaign, and if we look tired, that's why.
We're not tired. Comes out just about 7:30 every morning, less than 15 minutes, everything you need to know.
Sam is never tired, as you may have noticed.
No, he's like Tigger.
Yes.
It's good to see you both. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. I wonder what that makes you. Winnie the Pooh.
Winnie the Pooh, a tired little Winnie the Pooh in the corner, I'm afraid. I'll take that.
Still to come. I don't know what to say, so I'll say still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky.
The realm's only hope is in a leader strong enough to unite it.
All fired up for a night on the red carpet. The stars of Sky News' favourite fantasy series head to Leicester Square.
And now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that the boat seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world.
I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
That's it. It got us then.
There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits going in still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news.
Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at her arms, I can put my entire hand round.
This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Mother Nature can be vicious, absolutely savage.
The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa!
Close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
Claire's here for our Monday morning travel look. And what on earth is going on with liquids in your hand luggage? I thought you could leave them in now.
Yeah, well, it's a very good question, and actually the answer depends on where you're flying from. Until this week, there were regional airports which had introduced new scanners, like really high-tech machinery, which meant you could, in theory, take liquids in your hand luggage of any amount, so above 100 mils. That has changed now, so those 6 regional airports are saying, well, actually, there's a really high rejection rate, higher than expected, on those scanners. So it's increasing queues. So actually, could you please, as passengers, revert to the 100 mil limit? And actually, as passengers, you probably won't need to take them out of your bag, but you might need to be prepared to take them out of your bag. So that's come from ministers. It's a surprise announcement on Friday night from Department of Transport, and there we are. Of course, the big airports haven't even introduced these scanners throughout.
For 20-odd years.
Yeah.
Nothing more fun than a mosaic of health and safety regulations, is there, that is not consistent from one place to another.
No, and interestingly, Birmingham Airport, which changed the rules earlier than these other regional ones, has come out and said, well, come on, passengers, you know, you're holding us up. 20 minutes per passenger if you get it wrong. Sort it out.
They need to send
which is rich.
a working visit to Genoa Airport, because for years now you can take up to 500 grams of pesto in your hand luggage.
Really?
Yeah, as long as you get the special sticker. It goes through a special scanner, the pesto scanner.
Special pesto
sticker?
sticker?
Yeah, the special pesto sticker and scanner. But they sorted out that, I think that was 2017? They got that sorted?
Apparently it's sun cream that's causing the problem.
Sun cream,
because of the consistency. So they can't figure it out, so they think, oh, no, you have to take it out your bag.
But surely they would have designed it to be able to work for sun cream, considering it's airports where people go on holiday, therefore sun cream's going to be in their bag. Is that not a no-brainer?
Well, no, and it has taken quite a while for them to discover this. But, so there we are, more confusion.
Big shout out to Shannon Airport.
Shannon Airport, yes.
Brilliant. They were one of the first adopters, and every time I go through that airport, they're great.
Yeah, very quick.
You'd have thought a little tiny airport like Shannon, reasonably small airport like Shannon, as opposed to somewhere like London Heathrow, who still haven't actually adopted it.
No.
Madness.
Because the scanners are too big, apparently.
And Heathrow's not big enough?
No, or complex enough.
It does kind of feel as though, you know, we're paying more and more and more for flights now. Like, the days of paying $9.99 for a flight does seem to be a distant past. But the level of investment into the airport infrastructure itself, when you walk around many a terminal now, just doesn't feel as though it's there.
Exactly, and it's so important and can influence your experience as a passenger so much. I mean, you know, we have recently run a poll of our readers' best and worst airports. Ooh. And honestly, I think individual opinion quite clearly depends on the experiences you've had there. If you've been delayed, you've had a horrendous time, you're not going to like that airport. But, you know, it's small things. It's investment, as you say. It's some decent food and drink. It's, you know, somewhere to sit rather than a departure gate in a corridor. You know, I mean, it's the little things which really affect those journeys.
So which are good airports and which are bad airports, according to you?
Well, again, it depends on your experience, but generally speaking, the further east you go, the more efficient, the better experience you're going to have. You know, there's the beautiful architecture of Abu Dhabi Airport, for example, where security takes 60 seconds. What's not to like about that? Fantastic. You know, Dubai is typically over the top, amazing lifts, beautiful waterfalls. But smaller airports, such as Alicante, with a playground in the airport, great for parents. And there's other airports where you'll have soft play, for example, next to a Pret. just makes sense. So just thoughtful investment, Gareth, as you say.
So which airports are not good?
Well, personally speaking...
I think we know.
Yes, so Manila has come out very chaotically at the top. Geneva Airport is the gateway to so many places. You'd think it would be exciting. Sadly not, particularly February half-term.
Swiss efficiency dies around the edges of Geneva Airport.
Yeah, I have been that soldier.
And also nothing to eat or drink and no space to sit. Charles de Gaulle Airport, again, massive queues. Mumbai Airport is so notoriously bad for immigration queues. They actually have a kiosk for people who've missed their flights due to the delays. A special kiosk for that.
Wow, that's awful.
Yeah.
You haven't said LHR, but I'm sure it's up there.
Well, it is, for all the reasons we've talked about.
Yeah.
Just a really complex build, and all those terminals, it's really hard to find your way around. I mean, we know about the delays. They just haven't cracked the security, and you know, it's a hub. So if you can't get through security and then find your way to your next airport, you're going to miss your flight. So
does it tend to be the bigger airports that are worse because there's so much more space to get through and they're busier, and do the smaller airports tend to do better, or is it nothing to do with size?
Well, I think the bigger airports have more people going through them, so there's a wider range of opinion, and yes, exactly. People have got bigger journeys, higher expectations, and, you know, an airport can make or break your trip as well. But the smaller airports, you know, I last week actually was flying out of a small airport in Greece, and we got unceremoniously booted out of the airport at 11:30 at night onto the tarmac because they wanted to close. So, you know, these things happen at smaller airports as well.
Wow.
Okay.
Oh, dear.
Yeah.
Worst airport I've ever been through is Nairobi. Oh.
Wow.
Oh, don't go there. Trust me, there'll be dragons. That's a link into, here we go, Sky's Atlantic House of the Dragon will walk the red carpet tonight ahead of the release of the second series.
The realm's only hope is in a leader strong enough to unite it.
Do you accept me as your queen and ruler?
Spin-off. I don't know how to say it. House of Targaryen.
Targaryen.
Targaryen, there you go. We'll see at the top of the hour. morning. 9 o'clock coming up on today's programme for you. How a cyber attack has left the NHS in urgent need of blood donations.
Plus, it's another big week in the election campaign with healthcare, schools and taxes all top of the agenda.
And we'll be talking about a life in rock and roll and what it was like to work with David Bowie and the Stones.
It's Monday, the 10th of June. The NHS urgently appeals for type O blood donors after a cyber attack on London hospitals. The wife of Dr. Michael Mosley pays tribute to her brilliant husband. As it emerges, he fell just yards from safety. Shooting ahead, the Liberal Democrats will be the first party to launch their manifesto this morning. Not so much fun for the Prime Minister, though, criticised again this morning over his D-Day gaffe. I'm asking you how you felt, or what was your reaction when you heard the news?
Well, I was surprised and disappointed, but he apologised.
President Macron is accused of gambling with French democracy by calling a snap election after his party is obliterated by the far right in European polls.
The realm's only hope is in a leader strong enough to unite it.
And there be dragons. The new series of the Game of Thrones spin-off premieres this very evening. Morning, the NHS is urgently appealing for type O blood donors after a cyber attack on hospitals in London. The blood and transplant service specifically needs donors who are O positive or O negative because these blood types can be given to all patients. The cyber attack has meant that hospitals are having to make manual checks, which takes longer. Earlier, I spoke to the Chief Nursing Officer at NHS Blood and Transplant Service on the importance of blood donations.
This week is National Blood Donation Week, and we're taking the opportunity to ask the Great British public to come forward and offer their blood. We're particularly looking for blood type O negative and positive, which are the universal blood types.
OK, why?
So last week there was a cyber attack, as you mentioned in the introduction, and some of the hospitals are asking for an extra quantity of blood during this period. Now, the reason for that is they're having to do manual matching of blood types from donors to patients, and that takes much longer. And we predict that we're going to have an increase requests of blood up until the end of July. So we're going to plan to have more donations coming through to make sure we have enough blood to be able to support the NHS.
How long does blood last for?
Blood lasts for 35 days. So therefore, it's really important we continue to have a constant supply of donations coming through. And those donations are needed for emergency services, for childbirth and for routine treatment. And our O-type blood supplies are kept on our emergency vehicles and also on the helicopter vehicles for those emergency areas.
OK, so given that you're having to do things by hand, by paper, as it were, at the moment, does that mean that some blood might have to be wasted? Is that why you're so desperate to get blood?
Well, when we don't know what someone's blood type is, it is safest to give O negative, which can be given to anyone, and O positive, which can be given to men or to women who are beyond their childbearing years. So to avoid wastage, we need to have really high supplies of that type of blood. And we really, really would request that the public come forward. If they already have appointments, please keep them. If you have given blood in the past, do consider coming back. And if you haven't given blood in the past, please contact us.
And if you're not type O, negative or positive, don't come because...
No, please. We would want all blood types to come forward, even if you don't know what your blood type is. We've got 13,000 appointments England-wide available, and within London specifically, we've got 3,400 appointments, and our fixed donor centres have appointments available.
So how do people find out more about them?
So they can contact us on our website on blood.co.uk or call us on 0300 123 23 23.
And do it today is what they're saying.
That's right. It's a bit like supermarket deliveries in a way, blood. You know, it's got a shelf life. They can keep it for about 35 days, but obviously you need that just-in-time delivery system to be running. Blood donations are expensive and difficult to procure as well, even though there's lots of people willing to donate blood. It's a system that needs to be run pretty tight and efficiently. When you have an increase in demand, like we're seeing in London, because of this cyber attack, as the nursing director there was just explaining for NHS Blood and Transplant, it knocks things out of whack. They've had a big increase in demand from those London hospitals, unsure whether they can safely match blood quickly enough because of the cyber attack taking out their pathology, their blood testing services. They're putting in extra demand for O-type blood because that's the universal blood type you can give to anybody. And that's left them short. You know, they've only got 2.5 days worth of O-negative blood left. They like to have 6 days of cushion. So they're getting close to what would trigger an Amber Alert in the system. Not quite there yet, but yeah, they want blood donations now. Quick to turn around. Once you give blood, it can be in a hospital within 2-3 days. It has to be screened and tested for various things before it can go in. But you know, if they get the response they're looking for, shouldn't be too much of an impact.
And what should we be saying to people who, you know, thinking blood donations and then they're thinking of the contaminated blood scandal that we've heard about, and that's in the back of their minds?
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly, I think it was a concern amongst NHS Blood and Transplant. I was speaking to them around the infected blood scandal. Are you worried about a fall-off in people willing to come forward, or worse still, a fall-off in people willing to have blood donation? Nowadays, all blood donations, you're screened a lot more carefully beforehand about your lifestyle, your travel history. Could you have been somewhere and picked up a foreign bug or something? They also, testing is a lot more efficient now than it was back in the 70s and 80s, and they'll test for all of the major blood-borne viruses before your blood donation enters the supply. So, you know, there hasn't been a case.
Should be worried about that because it is on an anonymous basis. They, you know, if you have some sort of condition that you're not aware of, they may well tell you, but it's not something that is more widely
Absolutely,
available.
it's entirely confidential. You have a private consultation with the donation nurse before you would give that. It's entirely confidential. You can discuss any medical history. There's very much precaution, you know, away from risk as well. I've been before, and because of my travel history, actually for Sky and people like that, travelling around the world, I've not been able to donate blood just because there's, you know, if there was a possibility of malaria in the country I was travelling, wasn't able to give a sample. So the blood supply is much, much safer. The evidence actually bears that out from what we see in terms of adverse event reporting, which is also a crucial part of that whole system. So I would very much, based on what I know, and I'm a regular blood donor, if you have the time and you don't mind needles all that much, although the needles aren't as bad as you might think, get in there and give a blood donation.
I'm not a needle fan, just don't look, is my top tip on that. It's good to see you. Thank you. Let's talk about Michael Mosley. His wife has paid tribute to her husband after his body was found on the Greek island of Symi after 4 days of searching. TV doctor was last seen on Wednesday when he went out for a walk. CCTV footage reportedly shows him falling over, only metres from safety. Our correspondent Sadia Chowdhury has more from Greece.
So many questions still are left unanswered, but perhaps a sense of closure for Dr. Mosley's family that he has at least been found. We heard earlier in the week about their anguish and how much anxiety they had about what might have happened to him. And yesterday we saw the coroner arrive with her team and remove the body from the site where it had been found. And she spent a long time taking photographs and picking up other items and putting them into plastic bags. I think these are all clues about what might have happened to him. Because, of course, there are reports this morning that he may have stumbled and fallen. So lots to emerge from that. The coroner's office isn't actually on this island, it's in Rhodes. And that's where the body's been taken, and that's where the examination is happening. We understand that's where the family will help to identify the body as well. And a lot of people on this island who are part of the search and rescue team, who have their other normal day jobs, like working in pizza restaurants and coach drivers, all waiting to find out what happened, because this is something that has really taken over this island. And very much lots of people were involved in trying to find him and were hoping that it would be a successful rescue.
His body's now been taken to Rhodes for a post-mortem examination. Such tragedy.
Really sad.
Oh my God.
Really, really sad.
Honestly, everybody was hoping against hope, weren't they, that there would be a happy ending, but sadly not on this occasion. Big week on the election trail as well, of course, isn't it? This week. All major parties expected to launch their manifestos in the coming days. Also expect to hear from the Prime Minister?
Yes.
As well.
Finally.
Today. Yeah, the policing minister, Chris Philp, told this programme that he was surprised and disappointed by his D-Day gaffe.
Obviously, it was a mistake. I mean, to be fair...
What was your reaction?
Well, to be fair to the Prime Minister, he did obviously attend all the events in the UK and met veterans, and he attended the British-hosted events in Normandy and met British veterans there.
President Biden, President Macron,
yeah, but he should have gone to the final one. That's right, and he's apologised.
Yeah, but I'm asking you how you felt, or what was your reaction when you heard the news?
Well, I was surprised and disappointed, but he apologised, and I think if you look at his track record looking after veterans and funding the armed services. He's got a good track record that he can be proud of, a track record the party can be proud of, and a track record the country can be proud of.
Can you get past it?
Well, as Sam was explaining, he's going to have to, but I think this is going to stain the campaign potentially forever. Depending on how the campaign goes, depending on if there are any other gaffes, I think this could potentially be one of the things that Rishi Sunak is remembered for, which is a really painful thing when he's been trying, painstakingly to keep things on track and really fight this election that many said was not winnable. And it feels like this gaffe is really something that is cut deep in a lot of people's kind of emotions, as well as not just in terms of a political decision and a kind of lacking thereof political nous, perhaps.
You've got much more experience about these people than I have, and you know what the sort of advice that they're given behind the scenes. But what I can't get my head around is 100-year-old D-Day veterans on the beaches, the head of the free world, the head of our closest geographical ally, the head of the Canadian Parliament, all on a beach.
Yeah.
And he thinks, you know what, I'm going to go home and do a television interview. There's so many other ways. What I do know is there's so many other ways around doing that. They could have come and interviewed him in France. They could have done it on the plane. They could have done it the next day. What was going... Does it not question his judgment?
Well, sorry,
I banged my ring then.
No, it's fine. So there's been reporting that he technically wasn't coming home just for the TV interview. He was also coming home for a meeting, a kind of strategy meeting when it comes to electioneering. Why that couldn't have been done on Zoom, for instance, I think baffles many people. But I think you're absolutely right. You really hit the nail on the head there, Kay. People are going to ask themselves, you have a top team around you of advisors, and did nobody tell you that maybe that wouldn't be the best look? And if they did tell you, why did you ignore that advice? So either way, it looks quite bad. When Sam Coates did that pool interview for broadcasters last week, it was very, very clear when Rishi Sunak continued to emphasise again and again that he did all the British events. He kept saying, I've done all the British events, I just didn't stay for the international one. And he said it so many times, again and again and again. And I think he felt that maybe that would be his saving grace, that, he is a patriot because he did all the British events, so the other ones don't matter. But when you're talking about the Second World War, where the only way we were able to win was because we collaborated with other nations, then trying to kind of peddle an isolationist line, really, about only going to British events doesn't really work in that context. And you can say, the rhetoric from the Conservative Party for a long time, even post-Brexit and things is always, we focus us on British, but the difficulty is you can't be focusing on the British events when you're talking about international warfare collaboration. It doesn't work. That narrative.
Centenarians can stay. You can stay.
And that's the thing, is that physically it was very challenging for a lot of those veterans who were there. Many of them, they're in wheelchairs, they've got mobility problems, potentially health problems. And also the thing that was really, really a sore spot is that King Charles is having treatment for cancer, and he still insisted on being there, shaking their hands and making sure he was an important presence.
Let's see what happens when they launch their manifesto tomorrow. Meantime, Emily Thornberry's been making it up on the hoof.
It looks like it, Kay. So Emily Thornberry did an interview over the weekend about this, private schools, abolishing the tax breaks that private schools get. That's what Labour want to do if they were to come in power, and then they want to use that money to invest in state school education. Now, Emily Thornberry was asked about this and basically said class sizes will be bigger if we have this kind of exodus from private schools into state schools. And now Bridget Phillipson, the Shadow Education Secretary, is saying, no, she misspoke. That's not true. That is not our policy. Quite a big gaffe for the Labour Party.
Well, I'm afraid that's not right, because what we're seeing at the moment is a falling number of young people arriving at our state schools. We've got falling pupil rolls, and actually the challenges that schools are facing are quite different at the moment. Many are having to consider merging or closing. That's starting to happen in some parts of our country and is likely to happen elsewhere.
So you can see Bridget Phillipson there really trying to kind of move the conversation away from...
Exasperated.
Yeah, from something that she's saying is not true, it's not the case, it's not going to happen. And especially with this policy for the Labour Party, they know it's controversial, they know it makes people uncomfortable, and even though the majority of people's children go to state school, not a private school, so it doesn't actually affect that many people, ideologically, people find it uncomfortable to tax something that is, yes, it's private, but it is still education, and it's still children's education and childhood. And therefore, that's why they know. And we've heard Keir Starmer said again and again and again in speeches, he knows it's an uncomfortable decision and he knows it's a tough stance, but he feels it's a necessarily tough stance because there's no money left.
OK, well, let's see where that takes us, should we? Challenges, political challenges for the Israeli Prime Minister as well.
Hugely so, very much so. Benjamin Netanyahu looking more isolated than ever this morning after the resignation of Benny Gantz from his war cabinet. Our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, has more.
Firstly, I think it was inevitable that Gantz was going to go. He had delivered an ultimatum to Benjamin Netanyahu. He had demanded that progress be made on a number of issues surrounding the war in Gaza. One was progress on the release of hostages. Another was to try and resolve what is going on the northern border between Hezbollah and Israel. But ultimately, Netanyahu had made very little progress on any of those demands. And so Gantz was always going to then withdraw himself and his party from the government of national unity that was set up after October the 7th. He was supposed to do it on Saturday when the deadline expired, but he postponed it by 24 hours because of that successful hostage raid in Gaza that brought 4 of the hostages out alive. So what does it mean now? Well, Gantz, freed from any restrictions that he might have felt while serving in the wartime government, will presumably become far more critical of Netanyahu, and he will have inside knowledge about how the war has been fought and directed, and he, we expect, will use that against Netanyahu. He will call, as he did last night, for fresh elections. I think Netanyahu will continue to resist that.
The former Liverpool captain and TV pundit Alan Hansen remains seriously ill in hospital this morning. The club say they've offered support to the former footballer's family and will release updates as they receive them. The 68-year-old played 620 matches for the Reds, a number that puts him in their all-time top 10. Cat owners in England could face a fine of up to £500 if they fail to microchip their pet. It's now a legal requirement for cats to be microchipped before they're 20 weeks old. Animal charities say it will be easier for lost, stray or stolen felines to be reunited with their owners.
French President Emmanuel Macron has dissolved the French Parliament and announced a snap poll after his party suffered a crushing loss to the French far right in the European Parliament election. Adam Parsons has the latest.
In France, a seismic moment. The far-right Rassemblement National party on its way to a crushing victory in the country's European election. They pushed President Macron's Renaissance party into a distant second place, winning more than twice as many votes. Macron's response? Dissolving Parliament and calling fresh elections.
La montée des nationalistes, des démagogues, est un danger pour notre nation.
The rise in nationalists poses a danger to the nation.
For so many years, Marine Le Pen has been the mainstay of the French far-right. But never has she seen a victory as remarkable as this. 94% of constituencies voted for her party.
Je ne peux que saluer cette décision qui s'inscrit dans la logique.
I can only welcome this decision, which is in line with the logic of the institutions of the Fifth Republic. We're ready for it. After the legislative elections of 2022, which designated the National Rally Party as the main parliamentary opponent, these European elections confirm our movement as the major force for change in France.
She and party president Jordan Bardella have smoothed the edge of their politics. Now the far right is on top. The catalyst for President Macron's decision were the elections for this place, the European Parliament. And we have seen a surge in support for nationalist and far-right parties. But in France, that surge has turned into a shockwave. In Brussels, an election party for young liberals and a sense of shock at Macron's move.
I think he's really cynical and he's playing a dangerous game because I think he's risking to play out the security and the stability of French democracy.
On a night of turbulence, the Belgian Prime Minister also announced that he would be resigning following bad results. And in Paris, protests. The Rassemblement National may spark anger, but the fact is they won this election by a mile. Across France, there's a desire for change. This nation may just have fallen out of love with its president. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Brussels.
Europe correspondent Siobhan Robbins is joining us live from Berlin. Hi, Siobhan. Good morning.
Morning, Kay. Let's talk about Emmanuel Macron first. Was this a moment of madness, calling a snap election, or was it a calculated gamble? And lots of analysts are suggesting that actually this could have been on his part, a calculated gamble, because we know he's a very shrewd politician at the moment. As president, he doesn't have a majority in Parliament, so it's been quite difficult last 2 years. And we see the EU elections, often in France in particular, as almost like a referendum where people are talking about domestic issues that are annoying them. And this year it really was a referendum on his personality. So it seems that because the far right have done so well in the EU elections, he's basically saying to the French people, put your money where your mouth is and decide whether you want a far right, a really strong far right influence in the Parliament, and if you potentially want a far right Prime Minister. Now, it is a risk because the French people could say, yes, that's exactly what we want, and then he's going to have to sit for the next 2 years potentially with a far right Prime Minister beside him. Now, that makes his job more difficult, but he also might be thinking, well, actually 2 years of a difficult job is better than potentially 5 years of a far right president. So that's France, and we have to see really how that plays out. If we look at the rest of the EU election results, though, the far right obviously saw a surge in many countries. Here in Germany as well, the Alternative for Germany party, which is the far right here, came second, and it was a horrendous night for the Chancellor's party. They came third and are predicted to have got their worst ever results. Now, analysts are saying that's been fueled a lot by young people. 16-year-olds were able to vote here for the first time, but also bigger concerns which are affecting all Europeans. So the cost of living, similar issues to people facing in the UK, the cost of living, concerns about the war as well. And I think the other thing to take away from this is the fact that although we're talking a lot about the far right, the centre right had a really good night. They are the ones who have got the biggest influence still in European Parliament, and it's Ursula von der Leyen who'll be celebrating at the moment.
OK, for now, thank you. Still to come on The Breakfast Show for you here on Sky News. England fly off to the Euros later on today, but what are their chances in the tournament? We'll speak to former Premier League manager Harry Redknapp next. And the tell-all from the man who worked with some of the biggest music stars on the planet.
Westminster may seem far from Grimsby and Cleethorpes, but not for long. With a general election around the corner, we're bringing you Sunak versus Starmer, live from Grimsby. Putting their cases forward and facing questions from a live audience. Who will convince you to give them the keys to this place? The battle for number 10. Get the full story first on Sky News.
The Paddington Bear experience is a sensory immersive experience that's based heavily on the Studio Canal films, where audiences can go into the world of Paddington and explore all the different sights and sounds and iconic locations on an adventure where audiences are there to help celebrate the Marmalade Day Festival, which in our experience happens every day. It's built over about 26,000 square foot at County Hall, which is obviously a very prominent building opposite Big Ben, and gives audiences and family groups a chance to go in and complete lots of challenges and games and help Paddington make sure that Marmalade Day goes off without a hitch. Well, I think that Paddington is, obviously stands for such, good values. And I think, for a bear that stands for kindness and for being polite and for, the empathy that he shows is something I think we all look to and inspire to. But aside from that, I think that it's continued to be so relevant to so many different generations. Obviously, the new movies have been so successful, bringing Paddington to new audiences. But, it's a 65-year-old brand and is known, for the books and the TV series, and it's been so well looked after. And obviously, there was that iconic moment with the Queen before she passed away, which I think it brought the nation's heart and how much we love that bear. We are opposite, Big Ben, and we're right in the heart of London, very accessible for groups all over the city. But, the experience allows audiences to go into all the different sights and sounds through the Browns house. They even get to travel over to Peru, which is very relevant with the new film coming out this November called Paddington in Peru. So it's a really fun sensory experience for all the family.
England squad have set off to Germany today to begin the 2024 Euros. Joining us is ex-Premier League manager Harry Redknapp. Hi, Harry.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you? How do you think our chances are looking?
I fancy us to win it, even though we had a bad result the other night against Iceland in the last of our warm-up games. I still think we've got a squad there that's capable of winning the Euros this year. So I'm very optimistic.
Yeah, they're our bogey team, aren't they, really? But we could have done without losing to them.
Iceland, yeah, amazing. A little country, amazing how we can't beat Iceland. I don't know what it is. They seem to have something over us. But, yeah, they're out the way now anyway. And we get cracking next week with Denmark. And that's the first game. But, I really, this England squad is a fantastic group of young players. I think it's got a real opportunity to bring a trophy back home.
What did you make of the team selection?
Yeah, good. Harry Maguire is a loss, but he's injured, so he couldn't go anyway. Other than that, Jack Grealish, I'm a big Jack Grealish fan, but Jack has had injuries this year on and off, and he's not been a regular in the team. Although I still would have took him. I just think he's a special talent. And Maddison, again, I love him as a player. But had a great start to the season, but tailed off late on. But there've been other tournaments for him as well. No, the squad is the squad, and we've got some good young players in there, and we've got some great leaders. We've got Harry Kane, the best centre forward in the world, still in my opinion. Bellingham, Rice, Saka, there's Foden. Yeah, it goes on. Walker, amazing group of players.
Do you, my team are saying, because I don't really know it in this much detail, but they're saying taking Luke Shaw might be a risk, given that he's still recovering from injury.
Yeah, but if he is fit, there wouldn't be a better left back in the tournament. He's an outstanding left back, but he has been out all year or half the year with an injury. So they're taking a gamble to whether they can get him fit or not, and that is a problem position. Kieran Trippier would probably end up playing left back. He's a right back, but he'll play on the wrong side. But he'll do a job there. He's not as effective at left back as he is right back, but he'll never let you down. He's a good professional, and I'm sure he'll do the job and he'll fill that spot for us.
Surprising Grealish wasn't in the team?
Grealish? I love Jack. You know, he's a special talent. I love watching him play. But he hasn't played regularly this year for Man City. And so maybe, you know, they've looked at it and Gareth's got lots of options on that side. There's young lads who have come through this year. So he's been amazing at Crystal Palace. And, you know, Cole Palmer at Chelsea just had a great season. So there are options there that, and he's probably looked at it and thought, well, you know, I'm going to pick the players in form.
Recent surveys suggesting that around half of England fans think Southgate is the right man for the job, but 40% think they could do a better job than him. Where do you stand?
I think that's normal with football fans. They all think they can do a better job. You know, when you lose a few games, they start singing you don't know what you're doing. When you win a few games, you're a genius. You're nowhere. You're probably always somewhere in between. You're not a genius and you're not useless. And but that's how football fans do tend to react to a few bad results or a few good results. But I'm sure Gareth he won't worry about that. He'll go out and do the job. And knowing that he's got a great squad to work with, he's in a fantastic position, really. Bit of pressure, but good pressure. It's better to go there thinking, yeah, we've got a squad that can win it and people believe that than going with a squad that you look at it, well, we haven't got a lot of chance of winning anything here. So he's got to be positive, pick an attacking, positive team. Go for it. Come on, we can win it this year, I'm sure.
Would you go back into coaching if they offered the job to you?
No, I couldn't. I'm definitely. I wouldn't even be on the radar. No, I'm long gone with that. You know, Soccer Aid last night, working with Frank for me was about my limit. Now we had a great night last night. England winning Soccer Aid. That hopefully a good omen for England to win the Euros.
What about Scotland? How much do you fancy their chances?
I'd love to see them do well. I think they'll give everybody in that group a difficult game. They've got a good midfield. They've got some good players, Scotland. I can see Scotland, you know, I think they'll cover themselves in glory and a lot of credit again. Steve Clarke's done a wonderful job with them. I'd love to see them qualify and get out the group stages. That would be a bonus in itself. So I'm looking forward to watching Scotland play.
And a thought for Alan Hansen?
Oh my God, Alan! What a fantastic footballer, unbelievable footballer, great guy, great man, real class on the field, off the field. Special person, Alan Hansen.
OK, for now, thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Harry, fancying England to win. Let's wait and see, should we? Meantime, a 4-day inquest begins today into the death of Harry Dunn, who was knocked off his motorbike by a car driven on the wrong side of the road by US citizen Anne Sekulis back in 2019. Let's hear from the family.
Well, good morning. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's been almost 5 years since Harry Dunn died, unbelievably, but we're very glad to be here today. The most cruel thing that the Americans did in delaying justice for Harry Dunn was delaying this inquest, and this poor family should not have had to wait all this time. But as I say, we're glad to be here, and we're here to work with the coroner to try and get answers as to why Harry died. We know that thousands of people were killed or injured before Harry died, and we want to understand what was done about road safety outside US bases over the years. So yes, we're brokenhearted. Yes, we're upset. Yes, we're concerned. But above all, we want answers so that we can hope to take a few steps forward in terms of recovering from Harry's loss. And my heart goes out to these lovely parents who should not have had to go through this ordeal over these last few years. Thank you.
Harry's mum and dad, kind of how they are feeling, given you've had to wait so long for this inquest. No other families, or not many families do they?
Do you want to answer?
No, I mean, angry, really, to be perfectly honest. You know, we had to fight for 3.5 years to even get to the Old Bailey, to get our form of justice done, and then to have to wait another 18 months after that for our inquest. It's just I think, pretty much unheard of, you know, and we've had to fight to get the inquest done as well. You know, it's just been an ongoing battle for almost 5 years. We're tired, we're exhausted, and unfortunately we are still a little bit angry with the US government for making us wait this long. But we're here now. There are things that we need to learn, lessons that they need to learn as well, and we're jolly well determined to make sure that we do all we can to ensure that happens.
Tim, was there anything you'd like to say?
We'll have more continuing coverage on the family of Harry Dunn addressing the media ahead of a news conference and the inquest with the coroner coming up in just a moment. Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Matthew Thompson is travelling with the Lib Dems today. They're launching the manifesto. Matt, good morning.
Good morning. Yes, they are. It's a big day in the Lib Dem campaign. It's been a campaign, as you know, full of stunts and fun and games, but today is very firmly about policy, the manifesto launch. And what we're told in sort of pre-briefings prior to the launch is it's going to be very heavily centred around the NHS and social care. It's a topic that is, of course, very close to Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats' heart, as a carer for his disabled son himself. And one of the things that we know will be in it is a essentially £9 billion pledge to fix what the Lib Dems call the NHS and social care crisis. Now that sounds like a lot of money. In the grand scheme of things, it's about 5% of the Department for Health and Social Care's budget, but 5% actually, in terms of long-run averages, would be quite a big boost to spending. One of the things they want to do is recruit more GPs, give people a guarantee of being able to see a GP within a short space of time. Similarly with dentists, they also want to boost carers allowance by £2 and give everybody who's disabled or elderly or otherwise in need of care free personal care, similar to the system that exists in Scotland. And what I think is very interesting about one of the ways that they're choosing to pay for this is the Lib Dems are matching Labour's pledge not to raise national insurance, income tax or VAT over the lifetime of the next Parliament. So one of the ways that they are looking to raise some money is through reforming what's called capital gains tax. Now, it does sound a little nerdy, but it is quite interesting because capital gains tax, as I'm sure you know, is paid on the profits from the sale of assets, so shares, property, that kind of thing. And it's taxed at a much lower rate than income tax. And one of the things that experts often say is what that allows is very wealthy people who get most of their money from shares or wherever it might be to essentially pay less tax than most ordinary people who pay tax on their incomes. Now, we don't know the exact details of what the Lib Dems are promising to do, but they're pledging to reform that to raise money for the NHS. And I think that is potentially very interesting. In terms of other things to keep an eye out for as we get their launch around 11:30 this afternoon, what are the Lib Dems going to say about Europe? Remember their pledge to stop Brexit in 2019 became something of a millstone around the party's neck. So where will they go with that? I think that would be one of the things that it's worth keeping an eye on come 11 o'clock.
OK, thank you. Look forward to it. Joined now by the legend that is Alan Edwards, godfather of modern music PR. It's great to see you. Thanks for taking the time.
Morning, Kay. Lovely to be here. Such a busy moment as well, I know, around
Absolutely.
the studio.
You've represented some of the biggest names in the industry over the years. I particularly like the story about you having to convince David Bowie to take part in the Glastonbury Festival. You'd sort of set that up.
Yeah, that was funny. David wasn't that keen on doing big festivals at that time, and he was doing his own sort of quiet shows, enjoying life, just got married to Iman, everything was fine. And Glastonbury weren't super keen on him. They were worried he was going to do something very obscure, left field, like Tin Machine or whatever. And the promoter, John Giddings, said to me, look, let's get him to do it. And so I leaked a story to the Sunday Times. And my idea was that it had been one of the columns there. Wouldn't it be a great idea if Bowie played Glastonbury? Unbeknown to me, it ended up on the front page. Bowie headlines Glastonbury. Newspapers went, you know, the phones went crazy. They sold out all the tickets in a couple of hours. Glastonbury had a complete meltdown. And then the phone went quiet for 3 days, and I never heard a word from David. And I thought, oh my God, he must be furious. You know, he didn't want to play a festival, and he's booked in the biggest festival in the world. And after about 3 days, I got this message. Julian, who worked with me, it said, you naughty boys, don't ever do that again. But it was great, David said. And of course, it turned out to be the biggest one ever. I think the walls came down, they had 120,000 people, and it went down in legend. And it changed the sort of trajectory of David's career at that point, and everybody rediscovered him and remembered that he was one of the great British artists.
Tragedy that he died at, what, 68?
So sad, so young. And I had a meeting with him very soon before he died, and it was really a poignant moment. His PA, Coco, called me and said, would you come out to New York? David wants to play you the record. I thought, yeah. I said, I'll be out in a couple of weeks. She said, well, could you come in a couple of days? Which I thought was a bit unusual. And I thought, well, he must be really excited about this album. So I go out there and I go down to Electric Ladyland Studios in the Village in New York, and I walk in, and it's a big room like this, actually, and David's just looking at a screen watching The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, that brilliant seminal Western. But that's still quite a random thing to be doing at 9 in the morning. So we sit down, and he starts telling me stories about Soho in the 60s, you know, and he said, oh, do you remember that gangster? And he used to hold up everyone and grab them when they didn't pay the money and this, that and the other. Funny stories. So I said, you know, I played football with Bob Marley once. Did I ever tell you that story? And then he came back with another one. Then I said, guess what it was like working with the Spice Girls? And we did a morning like we were two geezers in the pub swapping stories. It was so lovely. And then Coco came back. We walked down in the street. David gave me a hug. And that was the last time I saw him. About a month later, so he passed away. So it was his way of saying goodbye.
Spice Girls, tell me about that.
I loved working with the Spice Girls. They were so much fun and hilarious and great individuals, all of them. When I first got hired by them, my feet didn't touch the ground for a few days. I was flown out to Rome And in fact, this is the thing, I had to go down, they were doing a little show there, and I got a call from my lawyer at the time, a guy called Alexis. He said, I've just seen you. Why are you going down the Via Garibaldi in Rome? I said, well, how do you know I'm there? He said, I'm watching Sky News, and they're actually plotting your course on the way from the airport to the hotel. And at that point, I realised how big the news was. The next day, we flew to Paris in a private jet to go shopping, as you do. Then we went to a disco in Madrid or something. And I remember then I finally sat down with the girls. And I remember talking to Victoria, and she was so funny. And I remember thinking, you've been misnamed. Forget Posh Spice, you're Witty Spice. And at that point, in all seriousness, I thought, they're such smart individuals. Let's bring out the media and the newspapers, and everyone can handle this individually. You don't need to be protected as a group. And so it came to be.
Do you think they'll get back together?
Well, they're bound to one day. I mean, every summer we expect it. I'm sure they're holding this slot at Glastonbury every year, or BST, but it'd be fun, wouldn't it?
What was Prince like?
Very quiet, incredibly shy. If he was doing this interview, he'd be looking at the ground. I mean, really hated eye contact. He wouldn't talk to you for days, weeks, and then sometimes he'd talk to you. He talked to me once for 8 hours, and we ended up in Boogie's nightclub in Kensington. And by that time, by the way, he'd had 3 changes of clothes. It was the middle of the night, and he was talking about Egyptology. So I thought, look, he's an important client. I better make notes and look like I'm taking all this in. So I'm scribbling it down in the pitch black, really. And then he walks around me, and he goes, looks at my show. He said, Alan, that's a funny thing. You write the same way as I do. I said, oh, what do you mean, Prince? He said, you write in hieroglyphics too. I thought, I have no idea what I was writing, but I'm glad.
I remember, I mean, I've known you for donkeys, but the death of Michael Jackson was an epic moment for you. You had to handle that without a misstep.
Yeah, I was just getting into bed. It was about 10 o'clock at night, and I had a call, I think, from Gordon Smart, the Sun, who said, Jekyll's dead, or something really subtle like that, always ill. And I knew at that point this was going to be a world story. So I called all the people from the team that I could find around the West End at various clubs and shows. I said, come back to the office. We put the lights on. I knew it was going to be through the night. We timed calls were coming through at one point every 30 seconds from everywhere in the world. And, of course, initially, Michael was just ill. But the actual death came pretty quickly, within an hour and a half, and we're trying to sort of put out the right stories. And, of course, he was about to play 50 shows at the O2. It was a complete surprise. I'd actually been on a video link with him at rehearsals that afternoon, and he was dancing, and everyone was saying, this is going to be the best show ever. So that was terrible.
Yeah, it was. I Was There is the book. Lots more stories like that one. And if I was to ask you who your favourite client was, who would you say?
Well, my most influential client has got to be David Bowie. I worked for him for nearly 40 years. We had a lovely relationship. A lot of it was based on books. He used to recommend books to me. He'd always say, have you read Peter Ackroyd? Have you read, And there's one, actually, Jake Arnott, guy, a great crime writer, and he said, you've written this book called Long Firm. It's about Soho and mobsters, and you must read it. Can you arrange for me to meet him? So I get hold of Jake, a very nice guy. We go down to Hammersmith Odeon. David's doing a show, but he's more excited about meeting Jake afterwards. And I've got Jake in this little room. We go up there, David comes up and says, Jake, I want to meet you. This book's fantastic. He said, do you come from a family of, gangsters and, hardcore criminals? How did you write it? It's so authentic. Jake said, oh, no, I went down Hendon Library and researched it.
I Was There by Alan Edwards. It's good to see you. Thank you very much.
Lovely to see you always, Kay.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Let's bring in Wilf. Should we standing by? Some massive names there to chew on. Wilf, good morning.
Well, I know, I have to say, we're bringing Wilf with far less exciting anecdotes to reminisce about. What a great interview that was with Alan Edwards there. We do, though, have a lot more coming up on the day, of course, here on Sky News, and focus again on the election, on the Prime Minister's front, on the Conservatives. We'll just be looking to hear from him. Of course, he did that very contentious interview with Sam Coates on Friday. We haven't heard from him since, so we'll be keeping an eye out for that. We do have the Lib Dem manifesto launch in the middle of the show this morning at about 11 a.m, so we'll be looking out for that. Likewise, any Labour events. Of course, the Prime Minister will be hoping this week's launch of manifestos will take the focus off the D-Day issue last week. I'm also really fascinated, Kay, in the results to the European parliamentary elections, which of course then triggered President Macron of France to call snap parliamentary National Assembly elections in France. And some similarities there to what's happening here, of course, not least the fact that a lot of the MPs will be worried they might lose their job. Also, though, one factor in his timing, he'll have the Olympics behind him as they go to the polls. And we will be talking to Dame Laura Kenny, of course, Britain's most successful female Olympian, at 12:45 to look ahead to the Olympics.
No, thanks very much indeed. Coming up in just a few moments' time, we've got some breaking news about Douglas Ross. Stay tuned for more.
And now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way. Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that the boat is seriously overcrowded. This is one of the most severe viruses in the world. I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul. That's it. It got us then. There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits coming in still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news. Clearly not had very much to eat at all, a lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at her arms. I can put my entire hand round. This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Mother Nature can be vicious, absolutely savage.
The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Whoa! Close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
Hello again, everybody. Let's get some breaking news about Douglas Ross. We're chatting to you in just a second. Callum's standing by for us. Tell us what's happened.
Douglas Ross has intimated that he is going to resign as the leader of the Scottish Conservative Party here in Scotland after the general election. There are suggestions, and there has been a lot of talk in the past few days about some missteps that some would see that he has taken. He's been under pressure given he decided to U-turn and stand in this general election after previously saying he wasn't going to do so. Allegations that he stabbed a close friend and colleague in the back by standing in the Aberdeenshire North and Murray East constituency, while the candidate that was already selected in that area, David Dogood, was in intensive care. He's been in hospital. He's recovering from illness. Also some speculation over the weekend in the newspapers around questions over Douglas Ross's expenses for his football matches. Because let's remember, he has 3 jobs. He's an MSP here in Scotland. He was an MP, and he also is a football linesman as well. He runs the lines at the weekend. So Douglas Ross says he will resign if he succeeds in this general election. This is a big moment in Scottish politics and a big moment again for the Conservatives in this campaign.
OK, I called you Callum and I meant Connor. Will you ever forgive me?
Of course, Kay, of course.
You're very kind. Thank you. Here's Stuart.
Breaking news, a Conservative leader has announced that they are standing down after the election.
Not the one we were thinking of.
Not the one who has been under perhaps the most pressure in recent days, Douglas Ross. He's been doing a little bit of a leadership hokey-cokey, let's be honest. More than one quizzical eyebrow being raised over his behaviour. I think what it tells us is that the post-election Conservative Party is going to be potentially a place of enormous turmoil. You saw the jockeying this morning from leadership candidates. Do they allow Nigel Farage into the party? Do they not? You know, this is not a party talking about however many thousand bobbies on the beat Rishi Sunak's trying to get people to talk about. This is not a party that is entirely focused on the general election at hand. It's a party thinking about what is conservatism, what is the centre-right in this country, and how do they put back everything in a few weeks' time if, as the polls suggest and many of them expect, they don't win.
What does he have to do? What can he do, Rishi Sunak, to try and get this campaign back on track?
Well, back on track means kind of losing less, if we're being honest. That's what many Tory candidates would tell me. And they don't have high hopes at this point for a game changer. They want 2 things and no more from the leadership. The first is to stop messing up, tomorrow's manifesto launch. Don't let it unravel any further. And the second, and they're baffled that this isn't happening, is a greater focus on
He's
Labour.
never won a campaign, we should say that, whether it was with Liz Truss or going to the country.
No, and, you know, right back at the start of that, you know, vote when he was standing against Liz Truss, there were signs there he could be quite tin-eared, depending on the audience that he's pitching to. But they just want him to not make mistakes and go harder on
Politics at Jack and Sam's every morning during the election campaign. We are back at 7 in the morning. Wolf is next.